Chief Burchett had extensive experience in wildland and structure fire. Chief Burchett leaves behind a wife and a handsome young son. He was 42 years old. This is not the only loss for our fire department, but a loss for all fire departments in the nation. We appreciate all the heartfelt support from the Draper community, CAL FIRE, the state of Utah, and our family of firefighters from across the nation. At this time, we ask for some privacy for the chief's family as they process this tragedy. In the coming days, we'll have more detailed information about funeral plans and a donation fund for his family, and more details as they become available. Thank you. I'll take a few questions.
The other Draper firefighters, will they stay in California? Will they come back? What's that process going on?
The plan is likely that they'll come back here to Utah. They've been pulled off the line. They're not fighting any fires right now, and they've been with him the entire time. He's had someone with him the entire time. They've stood by their brother and been with him the entire way.
What do we know about what happened?
We don't know a lot about it yet. The investigative report's not been given to us, so I can't really answer any of those questions.
Does this change the thinking about Draper City in particular, what's going on in these massive fires?
I don't think so. I mean, these men are American heroes. They go out, they literally stand in the fire to help other people. I don't know how you get better than that. I know he was proud to do it. I know all of them are. Every one of these men that do that job, they're heroes. I don't think so.
Is there anyone who knew him personally who can tell us a little more about it?
You know, there are a lot of people that knew him personally, lots. I don't know if anybody's ready to talk too much about him right this minute. Anyone else?
I was wondering if maybe one of the fire chiefs could talk about the morale right now with the those that are still there fighting the fires.
Well, Mr. Bart Vaudry, he's one of our chiefs.
You know, obviously the department's heartbroken through it. I want to express my deepest appreciation for Unified Fire Authority and all of the Valley Fire Departments. They've all reached out for assistance in this time of need. I hope that answers your question.
What about you personally?
I've known Matt for a long time, for over 20 years. It's tough. You know, anytime we lose a brother, it's hard. This will be felt across the country.
Today, you guys continue to work here in Draper, and you have guys and gals on the force today. What's that going to be like? Who's still protecting us?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, no, what is it like for all? There's so many of you that still have to work today despite this.
Like the mayor said, this is a job that we love. Yeah, you know, we got into this profession to help people, and Matt jumped at the chance to go assist in California, and I think anybody in our department would do the same. Any other questions?
How long was he with the department, and talk a little bit about his service to the department?
Chief Burchett came to us from Unified Fire Authority, where he spent about 20 years. He just recently started with Draper, I believe in May. We hired him as a battalion chief to oversee our wildland program, to help out with our emergency operations.
Has he previously gone on wildfires like this in other states or around Utah?
He has extensive training in wildland. It's where he started his career. One of the most knowledgeable wildland firefighters that I know.
Describe him just as a person, you know, hanging around in the firehouse. It's just the kind of personality that he had.
He was a good man. He had a very dry wit. He was very professional. Very professional. If I had to describe him, I would describe him as a master of his craft.
Can you think of any examples of just his, either his wit or just how masterful he was at his job?
Not at this
What's the process from here, getting back here and his family in that situation?
So we'll be working with CAL FIRE along with the state of Utah Salt County USC to get Matt back home. And as soon as we have more information, we'll get out some more details about the funeral services.
Do you have any photos you could provide of him, either from like an official shot?
Yeah, if you want to get with the Draper City PIO, we'll get those pictures out to you. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here, everyone. We really appreciate your coverage on this. I'm Mary Dean Alexander. I'm the Public Information Officer for Draper City. I do have handouts that have the correct spelling of Matt's name. I will be also forwarding some photographs that you'll be able to use, and I'll have those identified. So I'm going to send those as soon as I get back. I just want to make sure I have all of the stations that are here, so I make sure, because there's a lot of cameras here, so maybe I'll just walk through and get your names. We also do have a statement from Chief Clint Smith. He's out of town right now, but we'll be sending that as well, so we have some other items. And I'll just continue to keep you updated on Twitter and on Facebook. Is that working for all of you? You're all getting that? Okay. Thank you. Thank you again for covering this. I really appreciate it. Go.
All right, guys, so that is the latest on the latest fatality in those Mendocino fires in California, the largest recorded in California history. So those continue to blaze on, and we're going to keep you updated with that. But that was the latest from officials in Utah on that Utah firefighter. Meanwhile, guys, over in Italy, let's take you across the pond this morning. You may have heard about this. Genoa, Italy, this bridge collapse has left 22 people dead, 8 other people injured. It's a highway bridge connecting the south of France with this area of Italy. So fortunately, an international stream here. We can't just leave you on here, but just a brief kind of clip here to show you what it looks like, the remainder of the wreckage, as they try to recover more people and more structure from this bridge in repairing that. But we're going to go take it back into the newsroom today. Welcome to the stream on this Tuesday, August 14th. We're glad you're with us here in our newsroom for our live stream. We're going to show you some of the top stories of the day, and starting off with this story locally from the University of Maryland about that football player who died, and sort of the fallout from that, died at practice, and recent 911 calls released, and more updates on his story from our reporter, Jacqueline Kelly. Take a look.
Coach Durkin should be fired immediately because of the seriousness of the misconduct allegations, and to ensure families can trust their athletic program has their child's best interests at heart. Now, on Friday, the university placed 3 members of the Maryland football staff on paid administrative leave, including the head athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach Rick Court, and another athletic trainer, as it investigates reports of an abusive and toxic football culture. The following day, the university put Coach Durkin on administrative leave. Billy Murphy, the attorney representing the McNair family, says these developments strengthen the family's position that this was entirely preventable and the result of a toxic environment.
That's an absurd argument by people who don't understand how dangerous heat stroke is and are willing to excuse football programs for not properly taking it into account and reacting to it immediately. This is a serious health problem.
Ultimately, we should figure out what went wrong in this instance, immediately update those policies, and make sure this never happens again. Those that are responsible for this occurring need to be held accountable.
Attorneys say the University of Maryland Medical Center performed an autopsy on Jordan McNair following his death 2 months ago today on June 13th, 2 weeks after the 19-year-old collapsed while running 110-yard sprints and showed obvious signs of heat stroke.
On the last sprint, he was not able to actually be in a sprint. He was actually in a walk or a jog at best. And that 2 of his teammates came back after finishing their sprints to help him finish his own sprint. At the end of that 110-yard run, he went down on his butt. He was treated by assistant trainers, but then he was lifted back to his feet. The trainers actually placed his arms over his shoulders, and he was walked over 100 yards diagonally away from the training room where all the resources would have been.
We talked to Jordan McNair's father off camera today, and he says he just wants to turn his pain into purpose so this doesn't happen to any other family. Meanwhile, his attorneys tell me they are weighing all of their legal options tonight. Reporting in College Park, Jacqueline Kelly, Fox 5 Local News.
After years of budget caps and more than 17 years of war, the $716 billion defense authorization bill signed by the president today at Fort Drum, New York, home of the Army's 10th Mountain Division, makes little mention of fighting terrorism.
We will replace aging tanks, aging planes and ships with the most advanced and lethal technology ever developed, and hopefully we'll be so strong we'll never have to use it. But if we ever did, nobody has a chance.
The increased funding sends a strong message instead to Russia and China.
There are provisions after provisions to push back against this aggressive attitude that Russia's taking against us literally all over the world.
Among the provisions, 77 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, 2 Virginia-class submarines, a new aircraft carrier, 13 new battleships, modernization of the nuclear triad, funding to develop and field low-yield nuclear weapons, and billions to replace aging equipment. It requires the president to designate an NSC employee to coordinate the interagency fight against election interference, and includes $6.3 billion to increase U.S. military presence in Europe. It bars military-to-military cooperation with Russia and provides a 2.6% troop pay raise, the largest in 9 years.
President Trump made no mention today that the defense bill was named for Senator John McCain, the ailing chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who has remained at home since late last year battling brain cancer. McCain's wife Cindy tweeted in response, "Incredibly humbled at the naming of this after my husband." At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
6-term Democratic congressman, deputy chair of the DNC, and frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General in Minnesota, Keith Ellison is denying allegations that first went public on Saturday. Austin Monahan, the son of Ellison's former girlfriend, wrote on Facebook that he was using his mother's computer and found over 100 text and Twitter messages that Austin Monahan claims were abusive and threatening. Also a video, almost 2 minutes long, that showed Keith Ellison dragging my mama off the bed by her feet, calling her an expletive, and telling her to get the expletive out of his house. The ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, issued a statement detailing abusive behavior and the incident allegedly on video from a day she slept late, and claims the congressman demanded she take out the trash. That is when he tried to drag me off the bed by my legs and feet, screaming, "Expletive, you answer me when I'm talking to you." I said, "Take out the trash." Ellison issued a statement saying he and Karen Monahan had a long-term relationship which ended in 2016, but strongly denied the abuse. The video does not exist because I never behaved in this way. Any characterization otherwise is false, he said. Experts say the benefit of the doubt these days goes to the accuser.
Voters, I'm sure, will have a lot of questions about whether these allegations are true and the timing of the allegations, but anything involving sexual assault is going to have a big impact in a Democratic primary.
Ellison is one of 5 candidates vying for the Attorney General nomination. Opponent Tom Foley, a former prosecutor, says politics aside, take the allegations seriously.
This is serious domestic charges. He serves as a number 2 person in the Democratic National Committee. Frankly, I think he should resign from that position. I don't think he should be up there until these allegations are resolved.
There's no information that anyone outside of the Monahan family has seen the video or allegedly abusive text messages. With the primary tomorrow, this scandal hangs on statements from an ex and a social media post from a 25-year-old. In the Midwest Bureau, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
7 Skyforce on scene.
A robbery at gunpoint thwarted in Pembroke Pines. Police say the woman behind the wheel of this Nissan Rogue fled from armed robbers to this Chevron on the corner of South Flamingo Road and Pembroke Road, but not without dodging gunfire.
Pembroke Pines police officers on scene. You can see the car that is involved here in this, and if you look carefully, you can see what appears to be bullet holes.
2 bullet holes in the windshield and 2 in the hood of the SUV. Police say the woman was driving west on Pembroke Road around 5:30 Monday morning when 2 white sedans stopped in front of her just before Southwest 127th Avenue. A man with his face covered got out of the car and approached her. But when she took off, that's when police say 2 people opened fire.
Gritaba, ayúdenme, ayúdenme.
A Good Samaritan pumping gas at the Chevron was there when she pulled in, frantic, begging for help. He quickly called 911 and handed the phone over. Within minutes, police were on the scene. Processing the Nissan for evidence and appearing to measure the trajectory of the bullet that narrowly missed the woman in the driver's seat. Her family, asking to remain anonymous, says she's shaken up but grateful to have survived.
The Taliban mounting a major new offensive against Afghan forces, centered on Ghazni, a key strategic city and home to more than 250,000 people. The fighting now entering its 4th day. More than 100 Afghan security forces have been killed and many others wounded. Those who were able to escape describing a deteriorating situation.
They were burning buildings and fire and dead bodies everywhere. The situation was very bad.
Afghan forces are now in the midst of a counteroffensive aimed at securing the city, while limiting the amount of damage and civilian deaths as much as possible.
The reason why it took so long for us to clear the city is that the enemies are using local houses as a shelter, and we want to avoid civilian casualties.
The Pentagon is monitoring the situation and has dispatched American military forces to help, saying in a statement, quote, U.S. advisors are assisting the Afghan forces, and U.S. air power has delivered decisive blows to the Taliban, killing more than 140 since August 10th. But the attack comes as thousands of American troops have struggled to get the Afghan military on its feet, with locals complaining of a lack of resources as the main reason they aren't able to pursue militants more aggressively.
If the U.S. would provide us the weapons and vehicles we needed, that would give us motivation to improve and annihilate the enemy.
The fighting comes amid a renewed push for peace in Afghanistan, with talks ongoing between high-level U.S. diplomats and representatives of the Taliban. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
Six-term Democratic congressman, deputy chair of the DNC, and frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General in Minnesota, Keith Ellison is denying allegations that first went public on Saturday. Austin Monahan, the son of Ellison's former girlfriend, wrote on Facebook that he was using his mother's computer and found over 100 text and Twitter messages that Austin Monahan claims were abusive and threatening. Also a video, almost 2 minutes long, that showed Keith Ellison dragging my mama off the bed by her feet, calling her an expletive, and telling her to get the expletive out of his house. The ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, issued a statement detailing abusive behavior and the incident allegedly on video from a day she slept late, and claims the congressman demanded she take out the trash. That is when he tried to drag me off the bed by my legs and feet, screaming, "Expletive, you answer me when I'm talking to you." I said, "Take out the trash." Ellison issued a statement saying he and Karen Monahan had a long-term relationship which ended in 2016, but strongly denied the abuse. The video does not exist because I never behaved in this way. Any characterization otherwise is false, he said. Experts say the benefit of the doubt these days goes to the accuser.
Voters, I'm sure, will have a lot of questions about whether these allegations are true and the timing of the allegations, but anything involving sexual assault is going to have a big impact in a Democratic primary.
Ellison is one of 5 candidates vying for the Attorney General nomination. Opponent Tom Foley, a former prosecutor, says politics aside, take the allegations seriously.
This is serious domestic charges. He serves as a number 2 person in the Democratic National Committee. Frankly, I think he should resign from that position. I don't think he should be up there until these allegations are resolved.
There's no information that anyone outside of the Monahan family has seen the video or allegedly abusive text messages. With the primary tomorrow, this scandal hangs on statements from an ex and a social media post from a 25-year-old. In the Midwest Bureau, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
Rising interest rates, a slowing economy, growing anxiety.
The country is in difficulty because we have millions, billions of dollars in debt.
The Turkish lira hit another low against the U.S. dollar, falling more than 45% over the past year, as investors worry about Turkish debt, an increasingly authoritarian government, and an escalating international dispute. Turkey's currency decline hit other Asian and European markets, and the Trump administration is piling on, last week doubling the rate of tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Turkey. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says his country is under economic siege and that the United States is stabbing his country in the back.
There is no plausible explanation for taking such an antagonistic stance towards a state that has had such a heavy toll as a NATO ally.
The relationship between these 2 NATO allies has deteriorated for years. This month, the Trump administration has markedly escalated this diplomatic fight over Turkey's continued detention of an American pastor, Andrew Branson. Authorities arrested Branson nearly 2 years ago after a coup attempt in Turkey, claiming the pastor was a spy. The U.S. says the accusation is absurd. President Trump calls him a gentleman and a Christian leader. American officials have repeatedly demanded his release. Last week, Turkey's deputy foreign minister met with Deputy Secretary of State John Sullivan. U.S. officials say the 2 countries have made little progress in resolving this.
I'd like to one day do a free trade agreement with Turkey. I'd like to get them out of Russia's orbit, pull them away from Iran. But there'll never be a normal relationship until Pastor Branson is out of jail.
While detaining Branson, Turkey has demanded the United States surrender Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim cleric living in Pennsylvania. Erdogan's government blames him for masterminding the July 2016 coup attempt. And the White House just announced that Turkey's ambassador to the United Nations requested a meeting, and today met with the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton to discuss Pastor Branson and the U.S.-Turkey relationship. At the State Department, Rich Edson, Fox News. And the White House just announced that Turkey's ambassador to the United States has requested a meeting. And so he and the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton met at the White House to discuss Pastor Branson and the U.S.-Turkey relationship. At the State Department, Rich Edson, Fox 7 Austin News.
This seems like a pretty clear-cut case of a company saying one thing, that they allow users to turn off location tracking, and doing a different thing.
If you turn off location history in your Google settings, you'd be led to believe the tech giant isn't saving your location history. Well, you'd be wrong. A new Associated Press report revealing that Google is tracking you if you like it or not.
It can identify you, it can pinpoint where you live, where you work, where you shop, and other places where you maybe don't want to share where you've been.
Now Google is setting the record straight, acknowledging that even if you took the steps on your Android or iPhone to protect your privacy by opting out of location history, when you open Google Maps or their weather app, the company will still pinpoint your location and store that data. Google is also tracking your search history.
There are a bunch of other things that it does in the background that actually pinpoints your location with timestamps to your Google account.
Storing your minute-by-minute travels carries privacy risks and has been used by police to determine the location of suspects. Last year, police in Raleigh, North Carolina, serving Google to find devices near a murder scene.
Where we have industries proliferating that are collecting and amassing personal data in ways that we as a society don't accept, and we can absolutely regulate that.
So how do you get Google off your back? If you want to keep your location private, turn off a general setting called Web and App Activity. In Los Angeles, Marianne Rafferty, Fox News.
Most FBI agents work under the radar, including Peter Strzok. But after Congress started digging into his texting habits, that all changed. Now, Strzok is gone, and the FBI is trying to recover its reputation. Former agent Peter Strzok spent a tumultuous year trying to save his 21-year career at the FBI, even testifying before Congress last month.
Not once in my 26 years of defending our nation did my personal opinions impact any official action I took.
But in the end, it was those personal opinions that did him in. His distaste for President Trump was laid out in multiple text messages with FBI lawyer Lisa Page. It was all too much for special counsel Robert Mueller, who dismissed him from the Russia investigation last year. An inspector general's report in June led to a recommendation that he be suspended and demoted, but the FBI's deputy director overruled that recommendation and cut Strzok loose. Strzok's lawyer in a statement said, quote, "The decision to terminate was taken in response to political pressure," but one of Strzok's chief critics in Congress said Strzok had only himself to blame.
Of course, his lawyer says that it was a railroad job. His only other option is to say, you know what, my client prejudged 2 major investigations. He made up his mind that Hillary Clinton was innocent before he interviewed her. He made up his mind that Donald Trump should be impeached before he bothered to interview him. And oh, by the way, he did a lot of this on the government phone, and he violated other FBI policy.
President Trump celebrated Strzok's sacking and said in a tweet he would like to see the Hillary Clinton investigation reopened since Strzok had been in charge of it. In Washington, Griff Jenkins, Fox News. Yeah?
This video is from a specially outfitted C-130 plane headed in search of a wildfire plume. Instruments on board pull in the air and in real time generate information on the composition of the smoke. Some of what's captured goes back to the lab.
This is science that will help daily air quality forecasts. This is science that will help daily weather forecasts.
Emily Fisher is part of a team of scientists and researchers from 5 universities and a handful of federally funded agencies, leading the largest and most comprehensive effort to analyze the chemistry of wildfire smoke.
Because the smoke will be in sort of variable places in the atmosphere, that's why you need an aircraft to go and sample it.
The summer-long study from up to 20 such flights could lead to more specific health warnings in a wildfire season that is off to a record-breaking and dangerous start.
It's a toxic exposure. It's like secondhand smoke everywhere.
So my eyes are irritated. I feel like it's harder to breathe.
This National Weather Service map shows the levels of smoke in the U.S. Bright red and orange are the worst, the blue reaching to the East Coast. Researchers want to know how it changes as it dissipates and interacts with other pollutants.
We might be able to predict more if one fire is going to be worse for some folks than another fire is.
For places like the Holy Fire in California, where public health officials are telling folks the ash could be toxic.
Final results won't be out for about a year, but within the next 3 months, scientists say they should have some unique insight into what we're breathing in when wildfire smoke reaches where we live. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
Daniel Antione is pretty much your average 9-year-old. Here he is, sitting on the couch with his mom and older sister, playing one of his favorite songs, Riptide by Vance Joy. But as his mom would tell you, his birth was anything but average.
Daniel was diagnosed with this heart defect at 20 weeks of age in my belly. And so I already knew months before he was born that he was going to need a surgery.
His condition didn't allow his blood to get the right amount of oxygen. Without surgery, it's fatal.
I knew that a baby heart is a tiny thing, and to operate on a heart, it's never going to be the same.
Saima Jahangir is a doctor herself. She's a gynecologist and has her own private practice in Austin. She says because of her medical background, knowing her unborn child had this condition made everything worse.
I didn't know that my child would grow up to live a normal life, to be able to do swim team, to play sports, to go to a normal school. Would he ever be a teenager? I would look at teenagers in the heart clinic and I would wonder, is my kid ever going to make it, right? And so I knew, and it was a very difficult time.
Daniel was born on May 9th, 2009. Dr. Jahangir says the following 2 months were the most challenging months of her life.
His surgery was complicated. After 7 hours of surgery, they realized that the surgery they had performed wasn't going to work, which means they undid the surgery, and then they redid the surgery.
Ever since she found out about Daniel's heart issue, Dr. Jahangir says it's been a lifelong dream of hers to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Not just for Daniel, but for the 40,000 other babies born with congenital heart disease every year.
Ever since I found out about my son's heart was to make sure that he had the best care available, access to the best doctors, so that he could live the fullest life he could. And once I accomplished that, I realized how many people out there didn't have the same access and ability I did. And my mission was to be able to provide that access and ability to anybody else who had the same experience that our family had with Daniel being diagnosed with heart disease.
Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa. The doctor says she decided to climb this mountain because the air is thin at the peak, and she imagines it will feel similar to what Daniel experienced before his heart was fixed, something Daniel finds pretty cool.
It feels good that my mom's gonna get to do her dream, and also I'm gonna miss her a lot.
At this stage in his life, Daniel doesn't fully understand what he went through, but he does have this to remind him.
It feels normal, but it also feels weird that, like, I'm the only one that I know at my school that has 4 belly buttons and has a giant slime in my chest.
And until he does realize exactly what happened, Daniel says he feels lucky to have his heart fixed and live life like a normal kid. Jacqueline Sarkeesian, Fox News.
Attorneys for Jordan McNair's family say Coach Durkin should be fired immediately because of the seriousness of the misconduct allegations and to ensure families can trust their athletic program has their child's best interests at heart. Now, on Friday, the university placed 3 members of the Maryland football staff on paid administrative leave, including the head athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach Rick Court, and another athletic trainer, as it investigates reports of an abusive and toxic football culture. The following day, the university put Coach Durkin on administrative leave. Billy Murphy, the attorney representing the McNair family, says these developments strengthen the family's position that this was entirely preventable and the result of a toxic environment.
That's an absurd argument by people who don't understand how dangerous heat stroke is and are willing to excuse football programs for not properly taking it into account and reacting to it immediately. This is a serious health problem.
Ultimately, we should figure out what went wrong in this instance, immediately update those policies, and make sure this never happens again. Those that are responsible for this occurring need to be held accountable.
Attorneys say the University of Maryland Medical Center performed an autopsy on Jordan McNair following his death 2 months ago today on June 13th, 2 weeks after the 19-year-old collapsed while running 110-yard sprints and showed obvious signs of heat stroke.
On the last sprint, he was not able to actually be in a sprint. He was actually in a walk or a jog at best. And that 2 of his teammates came back after finishing their sprints to help him finish his own sprint. At the end of that 110-yard run, he went down on his butt. He was treated by assistant trainers, but then he was lifted back to his feet. The trainers actually placed his arms over his shoulders, and he was walked over 100 yards diagonally away from the training room where all the resources would have been.
We talked to Jordan McNair's father off camera today, and he says he just wants to turn his pain into purpose so this doesn't happen to any other family. Meanwhile, his attorneys tell me they are weighing all of their legal options tonight. Reporting in College Park, Jacqueline Kelly, Fox 5 Local News.
After years of budget caps and more than 17 years of war, the $716 billion defense authorization bill signed by the president today at Fort Drum, New York, home of the Army's 10th Mountain Division, makes little mention of fighting terrorism.
We will replace aging tanks, aging planes and ships with the most advanced and lethal technology ever developed, and hopefully we'll be so strong we'll never have to use it But if we ever did, nobody has a chance.
The increased funding sends a strong message instead to Russia and China.
There are provisions after provisions to push back against this aggressive attitude that Russia's taking against us literally all over the world.
Among the provisions, 77 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, 2 Virginia-class submarines, a new aircraft carrier, 13 new battleships, modernization of the nuclear triad, funding to develop and field low-yield nuclear weapons, and billions to replace aging equipment. It requires the president to designate an NSC employee to coordinate the interagency fight against election interference, and includes $6.3 billion to increase U.S. military presence in Europe. It bars military-to-military cooperation with Russia and provides a 2.6% troop pay raise, the largest in 9 years.
President Trump made no mention today that the defense bill was named for Senator John McCain, the ailing chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who has remained at home since late last year battling brain cancer. McCain's wife Cindy tweeted in response, "Incredibly humbled at the naming of this after my husband." At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
Six-term Democratic congressman, deputy chair of the DNC, and frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General in Minnesota, Keith Ellison is denying allegations that first went public on Saturday. Austin Monahan, the son of Ellison's former girlfriend, wrote on Facebook that he was using his mother's computer and found over 100 text and Twitter messages that Austin Monahan claims were abusive and threatening. Also a video, almost 2 minutes long, that showed Keith Ellison dragging my mama off the bed by her feet, calling her an expletive, and telling her to get the expletive out of his house. The ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, issued a statement detailing abusive behavior and the incident allegedly on video from a day she slept late, and claims the congressman demanded she take out the trash. That is when he tried to drag me off the bed by my legs and feet, screaming, "Expletive, you answer me when I'm talking to you." I said, "Take out the trash." Ellison issued a statement saying he and Karen Monahan had a long-term relationship which ended in 2016, but strongly denied the abuse. The video does not exist because I never behaved in this way. Any characterization otherwise is false, he said. Experts say the benefit of the doubt these days goes to the accuser.
Voters, I'm sure, will have a lot of questions about whether these allegations are true and the timing of the allegations, but anything involving sexual assault is going to have a big impact in a Democratic primary.
Ellison is one of 5 candidates vying for the Attorney General nomination. Opponent Tom Foley, a former prosecutor, says politics aside, take the allegations seriously.
This is serious domestic charges. He serves as a number 2 person in the Democratic National Committee. Frankly, I think he should resign from that position. I don't think he should be up there until these allegations are resolved.
There's no information that anyone outside of the Monahan family has seen the video or allegedly abusive text messages. With the primary tomorrow, this scandal hangs on statements from an ex and a social media post from a 25-year-old. In the Midwest Bureau, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
7 Skyforce on scene.
A robbery at gunpoint thwarted in Pembroke Pines. Police say the woman behind the wheel of this Nissan Rogue fled from armed robbers to this Chevron on the corner of South Flamingo Road and Pembroke Road, but not without dodging gunfire.
Pembroke Pines police officers on scene. You can see the car that is involved here in this, and if you look carefully, you can see what appears to be bullet holes.
2 bullet holes in the windshield and 2 in the hood of the SUV. Police say the woman was driving west on Pembroke Road around 5:30 Monday morning when 2 white sedans stopped in front of her just before Southwest 127th Avenue. A man with his face covered got out of the car and approached her. But when she took off, that's when police say 2 people opened fire.
Gritaba, ayúdenme, ayúdenme.
A Good Samaritan pumping gas at the Chevron was there when she pulled in, frantic, begging for help. He quickly called 911 and handed the phone over. Within minutes, police were on the scene. Processing the Nissan for evidence and appearing to measure the trajectory of the bullet that narrowly missed the woman in the driver's seat. Her family, asking to remain anonymous, says she's shaken up but grateful to have survived.
The Taliban mounting a major new offensive against Afghan forces, centered on Ghazni,
a key strategic city and home to more than 250,000 people. The fighting now entering its 4th day. More than 100 Afghan security forces have been killed and many others wounded. Those who were able to escape describing a deteriorating situation.
There were burning buildings and fire and dead bodies everywhere. The situation was very bad.
Afghan forces are now in the midst of a counteroffensive aimed at securing the city, while limiting the amount of damage and civilian deaths as much as possible.
The reason why it took so long for us to clear the city is that the enemies are using local houses as a shelter, and we want to avoid civilian casualties.
The Pentagon is monitoring the situation and has dispatched American military forces to help, saying in a statement, quote, U.S. advisors are assisting the Afghan forces, and U.S. air power has delivered decisive blows to the Taliban, killing more than 140 since August 10th. But the attack comes as thousands of American troops have struggled to get the Afghan military on its feet, with locals complaining of a lack of resources as the main reason they aren't able to pursue militants more aggressively.
If the U.S. would provide us the weapons and vehicles we needed, that would give us motivation to improve and annihilate the enemy.
The fighting comes amid a renewed push for peace in Afghanistan, with talks ongoing between high-level U.S. diplomats and representatives of the Taliban. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
Six-term Democratic congressman, deputy chair of the DNC, and frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for Attorney General in Minnesota, Keith Ellison is denying allegations that first went public on Saturday. Austin Monahan, the son of Ellison's former girlfriend, wrote on Facebook that he was using his mother's computer and found over 100 text and Twitter messages that Austin Monahan claims were abusive and threatening. Also a video, almost 2 minutes long, that showed Keith Ellison dragging my mama off the bed by her feet, calling her an expletive, and telling her to get the expletive out of his house. The ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, issued a statement detailing abusive behavior and the incident allegedly on video from a day she slept late, and claims the congressman demanded she take out the trash. That is when he tried to drag me off the bed by my legs and feet, screaming, "Expletive, you answer me when I'm talking to you." I said, "Take out the trash." Ellison issued a statement saying he and Karen Monahan had a long-term relationship which ended in 2016, but strongly denied the abuse. The video does not exist because I never behaved in this way. Any characterization otherwise is false, he said. Experts say the benefit of the doubt these days goes to the accuser.
Voters, I'm sure, will have a lot of questions about whether these allegations are true and the timing of the allegations, but anything involving sexual assault is going to have a big impact in a Democratic primary.
Ellison is one of 5 candidates vying for the Attorney General nomination. Opponent Tom Foley, a former prosecutor, says politics aside, take the allegations seriously.
This is serious domestic charges. He serves as a number 2 person in the Democratic National Committee. Frankly, I think he should resign from that position. I don't think he should be up there until these allegations are resolved.
There's no information that anyone outside of the Monahan family has seen the video or allegedly abusive text messages. With the primary tomorrow, this scandal hangs on statements from an ex and a social media post from a 25-year-old. In the Midwest Bureau, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
Rising interest rates, a slowing economy, growing anxiety.
The country is in difficulty because we have millions, billions of dollars in debt.
The Turkish lira hit another low against the U.S. dollar, falling more than 45% over the past year, as investors worry about Turkish debt, an increasingly authoritarian government, and an escalating international dispute. Turkey's currency decline hit other Asian and European markets, and the Trump administration is piling on, last week doubling the rate of tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Turkey. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says his country is under economic siege and that the United States is stabbing his country in the back.
There is no plausible explanation for taking such an antagonistic stance towards a state that has had such a heavy toll as a NATO ally.
The relationship between these two NATO allies has deteriorated for years. This month, the Trump administration has markedly escalated this diplomatic fight over Turkey's continued detention of an American pastor, Andrew Branson. Authorities arrested Branson nearly 2 years ago after a coup attempt in Turkey, claiming the pastor was a spy. The U.S. says the accusation is absurd. President Trump calls him a gentleman and a Christian leader. American officials have repeatedly demanded his release. Last week, Turkey's deputy foreign minister met with Deputy Secretary of State John Sullivan. U.S. officials say the two countries have made little progress in resolving this.
I'd like to one day do a free trade agreement with Turkey. I'd like to get them out of Russia's orbit, pull them away from Iran. But there'll never be a normal relationship until Pastor Branson is out of jail.
While detaining Brunson, Turkey has demanded the United States surrender Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim cleric living in Pennsylvania. Erdogan's government blames him for masterminding the July 2016 coup attempt. And the White House just announced that Turkey's ambassador to the United Nations requested a meeting, and today met with the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton to discuss Pastor Brunson and the U.S.-Turkey relationship. At the State Department, Rich Edson, Fox News. And the White House just announced that Turkey's ambassador to the United States has requested a meeting, and so he and the U.S. National Security Advisor.
This seems like a pretty clear-cut case of a company saying one thing, that they allow users to turn off location tracking, and doing a different thing.
If you turn off location history in your Google settings, you'd be led to believe the tech giant isn't saving your location history. Well, you'd be wrong. A new Associated Press report revealing that Google is tracking you if you like it or not.
It can identify you, it can pinpoint where you live, where you work, where you shop, and other places where you maybe don't want to share where you've been.
Now Google is setting the record straight, acknowledging that even if you took the steps on your Android or iPhone to protect your privacy by opting out of location history, when you open Google Maps or their weather app, the company will still pinpoint your location and store that data. Google is also tracking your search history.
There are a bunch of other things that it does in the background that actually pinpoints your location with timestamps to your Google account.
Storing your minute-by-minute travels carries privacy risks and has been used by police to determine the location of suspects. Last year, police in Raleigh, North Carolina, serving Google to find devices near a murder scene.
Where we have industries proliferating that are collecting and amassing personal data in ways that we as a society don't accept, and we can absolutely regulate that.
So how do you get Google off your back? If you want to keep your location private, turn off a general setting called Web and App Activity. In Los Angeles, Marianne Rafferty, Fox News.
Most FBI agents work under the radar, including Peter Strzok. But after Congress started digging into his texting habits, that all changed. Now, Strzok is gone, and the FBI is trying to recover its reputation. Former agent Peter Strzok spent a tumultuous year trying to save his 21-year career at the FBI, even testifying before Congress last month.
Not once in my 26 years of defending our nation did my personal opinions impact any official action I took.
But in the end, it was those personal opinions that did him in. His distaste for President Trump was laid out in multiple text messages with FBI lawyer Lisa Page. It was all too much for Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who dismissed him from the Russia investigation last year. An Inspector General's report in June led to a recommendation that he be suspended and demoted, but the FBI's deputy director overruled that recommendation and cut Strzok loose. Strzok's lawyer in a statement said, quote, the decision to terminate was taken in response to political pressure, but one of Strzok's chief critics in Congress said Strzok had only himself to blame.
Of course, his lawyer says that it was a railroad job. His only other option is to say, you know what, my client prejudged 2 major investigations. He made up his mind that Hillary Clinton was innocent before he interviewed her. He made up his mind that Donald Trump should be impeached before he bothered to interview him. And oh, by the way, he did a lot of this on the government phone, and he violated other FBI policy.
President Trump celebrated Strzok's sacking and said in a tweet he would like to see the Hillary Clinton investigation reopened since Strzok had been in charge of it. In Washington, Griff Jenkins, Fox News. Yeah?
This video is from a specially outfitted C-130 plane headed in search of a wildfire plume. Instruments on board pull in the air and in real time generate information on the composition of the smoke. Some of what's captured goes back to the lab.
This is science that will help daily air quality forecasts. This is science that will help daily weather forecasts.
Emily Fisher is part of a team of scientists and researchers from 5 universities and a handful of federally funded agencies, leading the largest and most comprehensive effort to analyze the chemistry of wildfire smoke.
Because the smoke will be in sort of variable places in the atmosphere, that's why you need an aircraft to go and sample it.
The summer-long study from up to 20 such flights could lead to more specific health warnings in a wildfire season that is off to a record-breaking and dangerous start.
It's a toxic exposure. It's like secondhand smoke everywhere.
So my eyes are irritated. I feel like it's harder to breathe.
This National Weather Service map shows the levels of smoke in the U.S. Bright red and orange are the worst, the blue reaching to the east coast. Researchers want to know how it changes as it dissipates and interacts with other pollutants.
We might be able to predict more if one fire is going to be worse for some folks than another fire is.
For places like the Holy Fire in California, where public health officials are telling folks the ash could be toxic.
Final results won't be out for about a year, but within the next 3 months, scientists say they should have some unique insight into what we're breathing in when wildfire smoke reaches where we live. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
Daniel Antione is pretty much your average 9-year-old. Here he is, sitting on the couch with his mom and older sister, playing one of his favorite songs, Riptide by Vance Joy. But as his mom would tell you, his birth was anything but average.
Daniel was diagnosed with this heart defect at 20 weeks of age in my belly. And so I already knew months before he was born that he was going to need a surgery.
His condition didn't allow his blood to get the right amount of oxygen. Without surgery, it's fatal.
I knew that a baby heart is a tiny thing, and to operate on a heart, it's never going to be the same.
Saima Jahangir is a doctor herself. She's a gynecologist and has her own private practice in Austin. She says because of her medical background, knowing her unborn child had this condition made everything worse.
I didn't know that my child would grow up to live a normal life, to be able to do swim team, to play sports, to go to a normal school. Would he ever be a teenager? I would look at teenagers in the heart clinic and I would wonder, is my kid ever going to make it, right? And so I knew, and it was a very difficult time.
Daniel was born on May 9th, 2009. Dr. Jahangir says the following 2 months were the most challenging months of her life.
His surgery was complicated. After 7 hours of surgery, they realized that the surgery they had performed wasn't going to work, which means they undid the surgery and then they redid the surgery.
Ever since she found out about Daniel's heart issue, Dr. Jahangir says it's been a lifelong dream of hers to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Not just for Daniel, but for the 40,000 other babies born with congenital heart disease every year.
Ever since I found out about my son's heart was to make sure that he had the best care available, access to the best doctors, so that he could live the fullest life he could. And once I accomplished that, I realized how many people out there didn't have the same access and ability I did. And my mission was to be able to provide that access and ability to anybody else who had the same experience that our family had with Daniel being diagnosed with heart disease.
Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa. The doctor says she decided to climb this mountain because the air is thin at the peak, and she imagines it will feel similar to what Daniel experienced before his heart was fixed, something Daniel finds pretty cool.
It feels good that my mom's gonna get to do her dream, and also I'm gonna miss her a lot.
At this stage in his life, Daniel doesn't fully understand what he went through, but he does have this to remind him.
It feels normal, but it also feels weird that, like, I'm the only one that I know at my school that has 4 belly buttons and has a giant slime in my chest.
And until he does realize exactly what happened, Daniel says he feels lucky to have his heart fixed and live life like a normal kid. Jacqueline Sarkeesian, Fox News.
Attorneys
questions, and perhaps by kind of reining in some of the lower court mischief that he views as mischief there. The second area is under the Administrative Procedure Act, arbitrary and capricious review. And I'm not going to spend as much time on this, but Judge Kavanaugh takes hard look review seriously under the Administrative Procedure Act. The most prominent decision is one that led to the Michigan v. EPA decision at the Supreme Court, where Judge Kavanaugh in dissent at the DC Circuit said, when the statute says necessary and appropriate, that means that the EPA must consider costs. So under the Administrative Procedure Act, ultimately a 5-4 conservative majority of the court endorsed that position. But you get from that a reading that Justice Kavanaugh is going to look at the agency's decision, is going to ask, did they consider all the statutory factors? Are they acting within their statutory authority? Did they consider counter arguments? There were substantial counter arguments. Did they otherwise follow all the procedures that Congress requires? If not, the agency is not going to be able to regulate. We're going to send it back. If so, then the agency wins, right? And if you look at his record, agencies win, agencies lose under hard look review. Sometimes it's a liberal win when the agency loses. Sometimes it's a conservative win. You see a judge that, in my opinion, is quite principled in applying the Administrative Procedure Act's arbitrary and capricious review standard. I will say there have been a number of environmental law professors, and I'll conclude on this, that have worried about kind of the future of the administrative state under the Administrative Procedure Act. And I'll pull one quote from Professor Michael Livermore, said, given congressional gridlock, notice and comment rulemaking by environmental agencies has become the primary vehicle for environmental progress over the past several decades. Replacing Kennedy with Kavanaugh will make this more difficult, halting, and fraught with risk. I actually agree with that. That getting back to where I started, Congress is not legislating. Agencies are using stale statutes that haven't been updated in decades to make major decisions that affect our everyday lives. And a Justice Kavanaugh is not going to give that a free pass. If the statute doesn't allow the agency to regulate, a Justice Kavanaugh isn't going to let the agency regulate. He's going to say, Congress, you've got to go and pass legislation. So in that sense, I do think that some of these concerns raised by administrative law and environmental law professors there's some foundation to them. Some of us wouldn't view those as concerns, though. Some of us would think that Congress should legislate, that if there's an issue of major political or economic significance, that Congress should take the lead and should say, yes, agency, here are our instructions for how you deal with X, Y, or Z. And so in a Justice Kavanaugh, you're going to see someone motivated by separation of powers, and I'll leave that for Jen, because I think she's going to talk about next, that's going to hold agencies accountable to what Congress has told them that they can and can't do. And quite frankly, I think in some ways that's going to be more searching than Justice Kennedy, but we're not going to see a deconstruction of the administrative state.
Thank you. So thanks to Heritage for having this event today. It's a great honor to be a former law clerk of Judge Kavanaugh and be here talking about his record. Supreme Court nomination and confirmation process is obviously a very serious and weighty thing, and so I think it's great that we're able to take a close look at Judge Kavanaugh's record, and glad that you all are here to talk about that. As Justin mentioned, he's got quite an extensive record, more than 300 opinions, a number of which were adopted with their reasoning later by the Supreme Court, cited repeatedly by the Supreme Court. And so I'm going to peel off a piece of Judge Kavanaugh's jurisprudence today, dealing with some structural safeguards for government that are in the Constitution. And I think Judge Kavanaugh's really written a lot about this in his jurisprudence. And there are two themes that a lot of his opinions and his separate writings and his law review articles talk about. One is the safeguard of separation of powers, and that's a term obviously that we use to talk about the fact that the three branches of government at the federal level all under the Constitution have different roles to play. And so Judge Kavanaugh's told us quite a lot about what he thinks the proper roles are under the Constitution of the three various branches. Another structural safeguard that's actually a distinct safeguard then involves the president and his role within the executive branch. And I think the executive branch comes up a lot because it's obviously arguably the most complex branch with a lot of layers, a lot of administrative agencies. And so Judge Kavanaugh's written quite a bit about what the executive's proper role is in being able to supervise that branch. And so these themes come out a lot in his writings. And basically, he has really emphasized that to keep accountability in government, that the role of Congress and the role of the executive as being the elected branches of government is to really be playing the lead in making policy, carrying out policy. And he has conceptualized the role of a judge as that of more of an umpire. And so, calling balls and strikes. And so that doesn't always mean that a judge is not going to step in, but it means that a judge is going to try to be independent, fair-minded, look at neutral principles, as Chris talked about in cases. And so Judge Kavanaugh's written a lot in general about how if the Constitution says that branches are supposed to operate a particular way, or if Congress has passed a statute regulating the executive in a certain way, then it's the role of the judge certainly to step in and apply the law. But where there isn't a statutory limitation or constitutional limitation, a judge obviously isn't supposed to inject policy preferences and neutrally leave things up to the political branches. Judge Kavanaugh's also written about the importance of the principles. I mean, not just to formalistically apply the rules in the Constitution, which would be good in and of itself in the sense that we're obviously a government that focuses on the rule of law, but that ultimately these safeguards of the separation of powers get back to individual liberties and individual rights, because by federal power being divided among three branches, multiple actors have to agree before a step is taken that regulates private rights. And then also on the side of the executive branch and having accountability there for the president, as the president's the only elected actor in the executive branch. We as the public have a role in bringing responsibility there only to the extent that the president who's elected is able to oversee what's going on. So I don't know if you all have had a chance to read any of Judge Kavanaugh's questionnaire that he submitted to the Senate in preparation for the hearings, but one of the questions he's asked is, what are his 10 most significant opinions? And I think in his answer there, you can really see the focus of his jurisprudence, in part because of the court on which he sits, as Chris mentioned, which sees lots of agency cases. But it's been themes of separation of power. So he lists his 2008 opinion in Free Enterprise Fund versus Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. And there are a number of things to see about Judge Kavanaugh and his understanding of the law in that opinion. First, what I think is really interesting is that as a relatively junior judge at the time, he's in his second year on the bench at that point, is writing a dissent. So he's already being independent. He's clearly applying the law as he understands it, even though in that particular case, it put him at odds with his colleagues. He also is right off the bat influential in the sense that 2 years later, the Supreme Court, in an opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts, ends up basically coming down on the side that Judge Kavanaugh had laid out in his opinion, of feeling as though there was not the proper kind of accountability for executive power in the structure that had been set up. And just to talk a little bit about the facts of the case, and this is how we can see more of Judge Kavanaugh's understanding of democratic accountability. The Securities and Exchange Commission, as you all probably know, is what we think of as an independent agency. So the commissioners are appointed by the president, but then are limited in terms of how they can be fired. So it's not like a cabinet secretary where if the president doesn't like a decision a commissioner makes, the president can just fire the commissioner or the president, at least under how the Supreme Court's interpreted the state of the law. There are tenure protections for commissioners. And what had happened in that particular case is that in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, Congress had created another entity, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, that was sort of under the SEC, but had quite a lot of independent policy direction authority. And so the court was being asked to look at whether it was okay that there were also tenure protections for these board members, meaning that not only could the president not easily remove a commissioner who was not executing his policy, but this SEC could not easily fire a board member at the time if the board member was moving things in a different direction. And so you can see Judge Kavanaugh's interpretive principles in the case, because he starts with the constitutional text, the vesting clause of executive power, the president's to take care of that the laws are faithfully executed, carry out the executive power, and looked at this, the history as well in the context, and this being sort of a unique structure in our system where, of course, for decades, there's been Supreme Court has said it's constitutional, have limitations decisions on firing the heads of independent agencies, but that had never been taken to this next level, where then it was also hard for the independent commissioners themselves to be able to oversee what was happening within that branch of government, and was that, or within that entity, and was that appropriate for folks like the board members who were carrying out such important decisions. And so Judge Kavanaugh, wrote an opinion saying no, which the Supreme Court later agreed with. And that general idea of accountability, which Judge Kavanaugh thought was important, again, for public responsibility, has been a theme throughout other opinions. His career so far in the D.C. Circuit's been bookended, and then on the back end with a similar opinion in PHH versus CFPB, where in a dissenting opinion before the en banc court earlier this year, Judge Kavanaugh talked about another unique agency structure, the head of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and whether it's constitutional for that agency, which operates in a lot of ways like an independent agency, then to be headed by just one person instead of the multiple heads that we have at the top of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and again raise questions about whether a president who's elected can fully carry out the agenda that the public's elected the president to carry out if the president's impacted in being able to supervise what's going on there. And Judge Kavanaugh then carried that out again in another opinion, dealing with a little bit different issue in 2012, an Aiken County decision, which is also interesting with the theme of executive accountability, because in that case, the issue was whether nuclear waste was going to continue to be stored at a facility called Yucca Mountain. And there was in that case, the dispute was over whether, at least the particular issue Judge Kavanaugh was looking at in his concurring opinion, was whether the Independent Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the more directly accountable to the President Department of Energy would have the final say on whether the administration was going to continue to apply to store waste at Yucca Mountain. And so Judge Kavanaugh spent some time in his concurring opinion talking about how, again, because at the end of the day, the source of accountability for government is the people and is in elections, that in big policymaking decisions, that it would seem more appropriate within the constitutional structure for greater weight to be given to the Department of Energy, which was a little bit more closely accountable to the president. I think that opinion, concurring opinion, is remarkable for two additional reasons. One is because it shows, again, the theme Chris was talking about, which is the neutral application of principles and this idea of accountability, regardless of what political party is in power, regardless of whether it's going to end up being a pro-agency or negative agency or pro-regulation or anti-regulation decision. Because at the time of that case, it was President Obama who was in power, and Judge Kavanaugh, in that opinion and others, talked about how important it is that if a president runs and is elected on being able to carry out campaign promises, that the president be able to make the key policy decisions that need to be made in carrying out the executive's role that Congress has authorized the executive to play. And so he emphasized that with this, and his approach in that case would have, if the court had ruled on that issue, been in favor of President Obama being able to withdraw the application to store nuclear waste as he had wanted to do. The other thing that's relevant about that opinion, though, is Judge Kavanaugh tells us a little bit about his view of precedent towards the back end of that opinion. And he talks about how, even though it's relevant to think about independent agencies versus executive agencies in terms of which agency should have a role for which issues, that the Supreme Court, in a case called Humphrey's Executor from decades earlier, had already decided the issue of the constitutionality of independent agencies. That was binding precedent, needed to be respected. And so he emphasized that and told us a little bit about his understanding of stare decisis and longstanding precedent in that case. Just quickly touching on a couple of more opinions that get a little bit more into regulation itself. Moving on with the theme of neutral principles. The first couple of cases that I talked about were about the principle of, the executive and how much supervision there needs to be within the executive branch. But Judge Kavanaugh's also written at least as much about the role of Congress and its interplay with the executive as well, and talking about how Congress when it has enacted a statute, if it's supporting agency action and agency regulation, that needs to be adhered to, just the same as if an agency seems to be going outside of its role. And so there's a pair of cases involving the EPA that I think illustrate this point. In 2012, in Coalition for Responsible Regulation versus EPA, Judge Kavanaugh said in a dissenting opinion that he thought the EPA had too expansively interpreted its authority to regulate greenhouse gases through its interpretation of the phrase air pollutant in a statute. But then just the very next year, a similar question came up in Center for Biological Diversity versus EPA in the same kind of statutory provisions. And Judge Kavanaugh, in that second opinion, ended up writing an opinion that would have been actually quite pro-regulation, where he talked about how the DC Circuit had reached an interpretation different from his own in the prior case. Precedent needed to be adhered to, it needed to be neutrally applied, and in the 2013 case, the EPA actually had more authority or responsibility to be permitting in the area of requiring permits in the area of carbon dioxide emissions, maybe than the EPA even thought it had. So you see a person who's very much case by case looking to what's the relevant legal authority, regardless of whether it's going to come out on one policy side or the other. And just one other way that plays out as well is Judge Kavanaugh and Jamil, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in the area of national security, but Judge Kavanaugh has advocated and noted the role of Congress, not just in restraining or guiding how agencies can act in regulation, but also in other areas of power that are shared by the executive and Congress in the national security area and international affairs as well. Judge Kavanaugh has talked about the role of Congress in regulating or having standards for the executive branch, and how it's the role of courts to be able to make sure that that those limits are being adhered to. And so sometimes I think Judge Kavanaugh's opinions, particularly that I talked about on the front end with Free Enterprise Fund and PHH, have been interpreted as being pro-presidential power. And I think that's actually really the wrong way to look at Judge Kavanaugh's jurisprudence. What he's been looking at is two separate issues. So within the area where the executive lawfully operates, Judge Kavanaugh is saying that for our individual freedom to be protected, the elected officer there has to be able to supervise what happens within the executive branch. And then it's a separate and distinct issue how much power the executive branch should carry out in relation to the amount of role that Congress has. And Congress has, as we know, quite a bit of a role in setting policy for the federal government, and then also at times in partnering with the executive in some of the foreign relations areas. And so Judge Kavanaugh's focused on those areas as well. So with that, I'll turn it to Jamil. Thank you, Jamil.
Great. Well, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks to my panelists, Justin, Chris, and Jen, for coming today to the Heritage Foundation, for having us. What I'd like to talk about today is Judge Kavanaugh's record in national security cases. And I stupidly scheduled myself so I have a hard stop at 1, so I'm going to keep it very short because I want to have time for questions, and I'll stick around as long as I can. But I think the theme that you take from Judge Kavanaugh's cases in the national security arena is this construct of separation of powers, and the idea that each of the coordinate branches of government has a critically important role to play in these national security cases. We historically as a nation have thought of national security and foreign policy as an area largely in the control of the president. And what's interesting about that is that when you look at the Constitution on its face, there are a tremendous number of powers assigned both to the president and to Congress. And on a sort of numerical basis alone, Congress has a lot more power if you just counted up the number of times that national security or foreign policy matters are mentioned in the Constitution than the president does. The president primarily has the executive power, has a commander-in-chief power, which is and has been understood to be quite important and quite significant. But Congress has a large number of things, whether it's the regulation of foreign trade, the power to declare war, the power to raise and support armies. And what you see in Judge Kavanaugh's opinions is a recognition of that role, the role of Congress in constraining presidential authority in war-making and in regulating presidential authority in the conduct of foreign policy and the like. At the same time, Judge Kavanaugh's opinions demonstrate a healthy respect for the role of the political branches in making these choices, but not a role of not simply a recognition that they have the primary role, but but also recognition that courts too have a role here. So it's not that the courts aren't important and don't have something to do, but that their job is to ensure that when the political branches are tangling in the space, that each one is given their due. And so if you look at his opinion in a case like El Shifa, where he had a concurring opinion, he notes the importance of courts actually deciding these cases and not just kicking, as courts have done historically in the national security arena, kicking cases on the political question doctrine. Instead, he says, no, courts have an important role to play here because in an area where, for example, Congress has sought to regulate the national security authorities of the president through statute, if the courts decide not to do anything and to kick it on political question grounds, they've essentially moved in favor of the executive branch because the executive authority stands. The executive decision to act stands, no matter that Congress has sought to regulate that decision. And so it's important, I think, for Judge Kavanaugh, for courts to play their role, which is at times policing that separation of powers and ensuring that the coordinate branches, particularly the coordinate political branches, play the role they're supposed to. At the same time, what you see in Justice Kavanaugh and Judge Kavanaugh's opinions is a recognition that when Congress does act, that Congress also doesn't have unlimited authority, that there are things that Congress might do that could contravene the Constitution. And so to the extent that you're interpreting congressional action, you interpret it to avoid, for example, retroactivity of criminal statutes and criminal law. And you see that even in the Gitmo construct, where you'd think, well, this guy was a Bush administration lawyer, served as staff secretary to the president, he's going to be pro-government. And what you find out is it's not about being pro-government or anti-government. What it's about is enforcing the rules as Congress has written them and the Constitution as our framers understood it to be. And so when you see there in those cases, there are cases where he's determined that the law can't be applied to these Gitmo detainees because at the time of their conduct, the law wasn't in place. And so that's an important thing to see in Judge Kavanaugh's opinions, which is a recognition of the important role of each of the branches and a recognition of the role of governments in constraining individual action, but also the importance of individual civil liberties and their own rights under the law and Constitution of the United States. And so what you see here is a judge who's a judge's judge, a judge who doesn't try to make it up as he goes along, but tries to interpret the law consistent with the text written by members of Congress and the political branches. And the Constitution is understood by the people who wrote it and is understood by those who exposited it at that time. And so that's an important thing as we talk about the potential nomination or the nomination of a judge to the bench, to the Supreme Court. You want a judge who has a healthy respect for the role of each branch, including his or her own. And that's the kind of judge that you see in Judge Kavanaugh. We have an extensive record. You've already heard about the 300 opinions he's written, 184,000 pages of material given to the Judiciary Committee. So this idea somehow that there's not enough paperwork, there's not enough material, and that September 4th, which is longer than any other modern judge or nominee is awaited confirmation, is just ridiculous. And I'm hoping that we'll see a swift effort of the Judiciary Committee and rapid action on the floor.
Thank you. Well, with that, we're going to open it up for questions. So please wait for the microphone. I think we have some, we have a microphone. And then identify yourself and keep it brief. Back here.
Thank you, panel. Should I stand or?
Sure.
Oh. Never mind, I'll just sit. So, my name is Ziad Aziz. I'm a policy analyst for 6 Point Strategies, which is a consulting firm in DuPont Circle. My question concerns the Savensky case, Savensky versus Holder, which was the Obamacare case. Some people, such as like Judge Napolitano on Fox News, said that Judge Kavanaugh upheld Obamacare, which I don't think to be true. How would you explain that dissent, and how would you explain his dissent in the 2014, or rather the 2015 Obamacare case regarding the origination clause?
Would like to take that? Anybody?
I can start. Okay. So I think what you see in the first case you mentioned is a textualist judge who cares a lot about the words of the statute and who does not care about passion or prejudice for any particular party or any particular policy outcome. The threshold question in that case was whether or not a statute called the Anti-Injunction Act required a challenger to the ACA individual mandate to wait until the tax penalty had been assessed before challenging the constitutionality of the individual mandate tax penalty. And Judge Kavanaugh had written extensively about the Anti-Injunction Act in previous cases, including a case that went en banc, a relatively obscure case called Cohen, but it was very important to the parties. There was a lot at stake. And he interpreted the Anti-Injunction Act to require that a challenge to the individual mandate's penalty be delayed. And I think that is a question that reasonable people can agree and disagree about. But what I take from that is not just how did he decide that issue, but what do we learn about how he will decide all issues? And I think the answer to that question is Judge Kavanaugh goes where the law leads. He goes where the text of the statute leads. Justice Kagan has said in a few speeches that in a world that has been shaped by Justice Scalia's textualism, that we are all textualists now to a degree. And to the extent that there's a spectrum of how faithful a judge is going to be to text, as informed by structure, as informed by history, as informed by precedent. On that spectrum, I think Judge Kavanaugh is very much toward the side that sees the judge's role as a limited role. He used to tell us in chambers and in his separation of powers class that he taught when I was in law school, he would tell us every case is a separation of powers case, even when that claim is not raised. And what he meant is that every case requires the judge to remember the proper, limited role of the judiciary in our tripartite structure. That is the executive and it's the legislative that make policy, and it's the judge's role not to invent law, but simply to apply the law. Those are a few thoughts on a very big topic.
I would say my co-blogger Aaron Nilsson at the Yale Journal of Regulation has a blog post on the first case there, and I mean, quite frankly, he's had this itch for the Anti-Injunction Act. I don't agree with him. I think he's wrong. I would consider it a reasonable position. I think it's wrong. And I think if you read Kristen Hickman's article on the Anti-Injunction Act that came out after that, I think was motivated in part by Judge Kavanaugh's opinion there. He's just wrong, right? I mean, he's reading the statute. It's not. He didn't uphold Obamacare. He didn't answer the question, right? He said that the Anti-Injunction Act bars it, and reasonable people can disagree about that. And I think Aaron's post on the Yale Journal of Regulation blog has some pretty good insight on that. I don't know much about the origination clause. I didn't follow that one as closely.
I mean, I think the one thing I would just say about this is, we as conservatives talk a lot about the importance of judges adhering to text and to an original understanding of the Constitution. But when we don't like that, we revolt. We say, oh, well, that person did this and this person did that, and I don't like this judge or this justice. But the truth is, as conservatives, we should be looking at the methodology of a judge and the role of the judge. And what you want, as Justice Gorsuch once said, is you want a judge who understands that he or she wears a robe, not a cape. And sometimes that means decisions don't come out the way that we as conservatives might like. And that's good. That's the job of a judge. A good judge doesn't come out the way they want every time. That's a willful judge. You don't want a willful judge. You don't want a willful justice. We've seen decades of those in the Supreme Court. That is not good for democracy. That is not what our Constitution intended. And that is not what you want for a nominee to the federal bench, whether it's to the appellate level or more importantly, the Supreme Court.
Elizabeth, can I just add one more thing that I forgot, because I don't want to be accused of being inconsistent with something I wrote online about this exact topic. And on the question of the constitutionality of the individual mandate, Judge Kavanaugh did say that it may be unprecedented, this type of individual mandate, and that there may be a problem with it not having a limiting principle. And if you look at the roadmap that the Supreme Court followed in saying that the Commerce Clause did not authorize the individual mandate, it was very similar to those two themes that Judge Kavanaugh struck. So I just want to make sure that I'm not accused of inconsistency.
Other questions? Down here.
Tom Jipping, I'm Deputy Director of the Meese Legal Center here at Heritage. Let's say you walk out the front door after the event and Mr. and Mrs. Average American are walking by and they ask you the question that's the title of the event today. What kind of judge is Judge Kavanaugh? And, you know, being professors, you want to spend the afternoon with them, but you only have a sentence or two. How would you answer that question to the layman in a very brief way?
I would say that Judge Kavanaugh is an independent, fair-minded judge who is looking to apply the text of statutes and the Constitution with all the context and relevant history and precedent that there is, case by case, looking fairly at the issues.
Judge Kavanaugh's jurisprudence is motivated by separation of powers. He wants to make sure that Congress is doing its job, that the president does his or her job, and that federal agencies are following the commands of both. And you see that really strongly. I love the idea that you see separation of powers in every single case, as he's always trying to figure out, why does he care that we follow the statute? Because Congress is the one that makes the law. And you see that repeatedly through his decisions. Now, are there reasonable disagreements? Sure. But he's the type of judge that's going to look at a statute, look at a law, and apply it neutrally and fairly to try to reach the decision that's most in line with what Congress had intended.
I think we have time for one more question.
Considering that courts and judges practically have become disconnected from the average American and are under not control or benefit of attorneys or special interests and those with financial needs, what do you think that Judge Kavanaugh would have on, as a Supreme Court justice to improve this issue and is disconnecting with the society to be somehow eliminated, or at least, get in some less than more and more is courts and judges and everything is becoming specialized that average people don't understand at the same time that everybody is supposed to know the law?
Well, I think two things. I mean, first of all, with Judge Kavanaugh's understanding of the role of the branches and judges as being more that of umpire applying the law. I mean, that philosophy played out is going to, in the end, lead to the elected branches, your member of Congress, your senator, the president, reaching a greater number of decisions, having more influence over the direction of the country right now than sometimes we turn to the Supreme Court for. So I think that in and of itself helps with the common person, because the common person or the average person, the public, can see, can talk to more readily, and it's more appropriate to talk to and lobby their elected representative. So if that person's making more of the decisions, that keeps things real a little bit more. And then the second thing, in his role as a judge writing and deciding cases, just as a very practical brass tacks matter, Judge Kavanaugh is somebody who's very interested in the craft of writing, to the extent that he is writing in a clear way that for sure he would want the first-year law student, the average member of the public, the person reading the newspaper, to be able to understand opinions, writing in shorter sentence structures, clearly explaining ideas. And so even in that way, I think trying to make sure that the decisions being reached are something that's more accessible and we're not sort of hiding behind a shroud of legalese or big ideas, but the judge explaining his or her reasoning.
I think there definitely are judges out there who are disconnected from the public, but Judge Kavanaugh, he is definitely not one of those judges. I would recommend a Washington Post article where it begins by interviewing the local bartender in Judge Kavanaugh's neighborhood. And the bartender says, "Oh, he's been coming in for years. I didn't know he was a judge. In fact, I didn't even know he was a lawyer. He was just always Brett to me, and all we ever talked about was sports." And I think all of us who've had interactions with Judge Kavanaugh, we know that he's the coach of his daughter's little basketball team. We know that the last time he and I had a morning meeting scheduled, we had to push it back because he'd been up too late the night before watching the post-game coverage of the Washington Capitals game and their championship on TV. So he's an extraordinary, brilliant jurist, but he's also a very down-to-earth and humble dad and devoted husband and friend and mentor.
Well, on that positive note, we've come to the end of our time, so please join me in thanking our panelists.
It's good to see you.
All right, y'all. So that was a panel from the Heritage Foundation discussing SCOTUS nominee Brett Kavanaugh right here in DC, live just a few moments ago. And thanks for hanging out with us on the stream for that. If you are awaiting, which we are as well, this event right below here, University of Maryland president and athletic director to speak out about the death of former football player and student Jordan McNair. He collapsed at a preseason football practice on May 29th, and then later died about 2 weeks later of what they're saying is heat stroke. Now, the family has hired an attorney, and this has been, of course, ensuing for months now. Today, finally, we are going to hear from the university, namely the president and the athletic director, whom put the head coach, DJ Durkin, and 3 of his staff members on leave following that incident. So we're going to hear more about it, talk about who is being held responsible and what's going to happen from here to that coach, to the university at large. A lot of things forthcoming here that we've been waiting for. So they have been hiring consulting firms to review this case, and the family, of course, has an attorney, the same one actually, who is from the prominent firm that represented Freddie Gray's family in Baltimore after that incident. So more to come on that, and lots to be said, of course, about injuries and heat stroke from football, and I'm sure that this scenario, this incident, will set some sort of precedent going forward. So we're going to hear from the coach, or rather not the coach, the president coming up. So that's in less than an hour. But for now, let's go over to San Francisco. We have some video here of a press conference dealing with tax fraud, and I'll get some more details for you on that as well. Let's listen in. Or did they just ignore it?
Ignored it. They first sent back a form letter saying that they couldn't comply for lack of specificity of documents requested. And my attorneys then sent a letter saying we believe that the request is legally sufficient. But we'll answer your question, and more information was provided on May 29th with respect to the request for public records. And that was May 29th. Today is August 14th, just 3 days after my 90th birthday, and I didn't see any of you celebrating that.
Quentin, would you walk us through the timing of when you first made your first request and then what happened?
Well, the use of taxpayer assets in the form of, who knows, probably 15, maybe more Secret Service people, expenditure of probably over $250,000 just on that one item of private business. Was made about February 24th, and it was sent to an address in Washington, D.C. My attorneys thought perhaps a month or 2 months later that the letter hadn't been delivered. It had been delivered. It wasn't returned to me. So the same letter was sent to yet another address for the Secret Service in Washington, D.C., That occurred in April. And then, as I mentioned, a letter was received requesting and claiming lack of specificity, which is a ground for denial of a Public Records Act request, to be sure. And then came my attorney's response that the letter did not lack specificity, but in effect will play your silly game and provide some more descriptive words. And that, as I say, was at the end of May. So now it's 2.5 months later, and they've just ignored it.
Judge, just so the viewer understands, what happened during this trip? Was he selling condos? Did people pay to see him?
Yeah, he was.
What makes it a business trip?
Well, he was selling condos and inviting people to invest in other Trump property, and they're tricksters in my book. He did it under the guise of some meeting on an issue of state to cover up for it. But as my attorneys have pointed out, I think even though children of a president are entitled to Secret Service protection, Junior is not a child. He's an adult, and he's been an adult for many years. And there's precedent on the part of the Reagan family. Young Reagan never requested or wanted Secret Service company on any trip he took. And that's honesty.
So now you filed, so how long does it take for the Secret Service to issue a response?
Oh, over the period of time, the U.S. Code requires a response in 30 days. It was about 60 days before a response was transmitted to me.
Does it violate specific federal statutes for the use of Secret Service by an adult child of the president, in your estimation?
That has not been answered by any appellate court or even a U.S. District Court decision. But if they want to raise that point in this case, I know Joe Cochette would be happy to litigate the point and set some precedent. More interestingly, I think, will be further public record requests under the Freedom of Information for other activity of the members of the Trump family.
So you are expecting a response in September about the Secret Service?
I was expecting a response when?
In September?
This latest one, this new lawsuit, they have until 30 days to respond?
Yeah, well, that's a standard federal trial court, federal rules of procedure provision that they have 30 days after service of the complaint, which I expect will be served today. They have 30 days to respond, either filing a motion to dismiss or filing an answer denying the allegations, which will be hard to do. I suspect they'll file a motion to dismiss the complaint on legal grounds.
Is there any other action you will take then if for some reason you get a response that says such and such amount of money was spent for Donald Jr.? Are you going to do another action then once you find out how much money was spent?
Well, after obtaining records, yes. Then the next lawsuit would be a taxpayer suit to recover money belonging to the taxpayers of the United States. Yes, that is.
Sorry, do you know what was behind the amount of money Donald Jr. asked when he organized the dinner in India, when he was in India?
Do I know what was behind it?
Yeah, he requested, like, it was like an invitation to go to a dinner, but it was...
I don't. And that, of course, is part of the legal process after a trial has, or after a lawsuit has been filed, as today. But the first step is to obtain the records. And you have to look at the nature of the records, the scope of the records, how much activity the records cover. It may require, as I just indicated, another Public Records Act request under the Freedom of Information Act. May require a couple, because it appears to me, at least I think it's a fair inference, they don't want to disclose those records. It's a cover-up. And that's why I've got Joe Cochette, who I've known for many, many years. Let me see how many, to be accurate, about 46 years, as an honest, an attorney with integrity, and a person who doesn't care about a political ramification or political party affiliation, but who's devoted to the law and justice.
Is the First Amendment Coalition on board yet?
I'm making it available, or Mallory Barr or Justin will, to the First Amendment Coalition. I think the next board meeting is next month.
Fox.
In this administration nationally, I think that it's a subject matter which deserves exploration. And if it requires a lawsuit or many lawsuits, those should be followed. I think in the first instance, it requires an inspection of public records. Not just the public records I've requested, but public records in scores of transactions and activity of the president, the president's children, and people who work for the Trump businesses.
And what do you think about the fact that Washington?
Yeah. He's out there planting, digging up the kimchi pots.
What they say? Oh,
Well,
Right now, guys, a live look inside that press conference room at the University of Maryland, where we're going to be hearing from the athletic director, Damon Evans, as well as the president. That's coming up at the top of the 2 o'clock Eastern hour. So hang on with us for less than 45 more minutes. We're going to be definitely pushing to this right away at the start of it to finally hear from the university about the student and this incident that happened way back at the end of May. Later, like I said, football player Jordan McNair died from heat stroke 2 weeks after collapsing on the field. So we're going to head back into this room in just a second, but take a look now at some other stuff that's popping up on our live streams here. Let's go over to this, and then we'll get more details for you.
And also, having worked in San Francisco in the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, I saw all too well what happens when crimes are committed. And having worked in San Francisco, which was a sanctuary city, it's very challenging, and it means that we all have to fight for an immigration system that is fair and equitable, that meets the needs of Americans first, and that also means building the wall. And this is why America First Policies was on the front lines fighting to make sure that Congress passed the biggest tax overhaul in a generation. We need the money. We got to pay for stuff, folks, all right? Now, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that President Donald J. Trump signed in December was already and has been a huge success. You've already been seeing the results of it. You can take a look at it in your 401k, your wallets, your pockets might feel a little heavier. You can thank the president for that. Because real wages are up, unemployment is down, and Black and Hispanic unemployment is the lowest ever recorded. And as a female Puerto Rican, I love it. And here's another one. And we finally eliminated Obamacare's individual mandate that was forcing Americans to buy insurance that they couldn't afford and that they didn't want. But we're not done yet, are we? You guys tired of winning yet? That's what I thought. So join us as we continue this very important fight. We'll be fighting with you every day to drain the swamp. That's right. And keep you apprised of the major policy initiatives that your congressmen and your senators need to support to take our country back. Let's get the bus going in the right direction, right? Because if we all keep fighting each other every day, each and every day, we will make America great again. We are well on our way, so let's keep it going. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the moderator of this fantastic panel. I've been spending time with them backstage. You're really going to love it for this truly important discussion, because all of us in the room care deeply about this country, about families, about jobs, about the economy. Tax cuts are so crucial. And our moderator today is Senior Policy Advisor with America First Policies. He's an extraordinarily talented man, Curtis Ellis. And Curtis, of course, is going to be joined by some superstars. Okay, they're not just all stars, they're superstars. And we have now, representing the people of Ohio in the U.S. Senate, a champion of tax reform, regulatory reform, fair trade, and skills training, Senator Rob Portman. And representing the people of the 1st District of Ohio, Congressman Steve Chabot. Representing the people of the 2nd District of Ohio, Congressman Brad Wenstrup. And Brad is also a member of the Ways and Means Committee. You know, that's the committee that gave us the tax cuts that wrote it, so we like that. And representing the people of the 16th Congressional District of Ohio, also a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, is Congressman Jim Renacci. And later, we are going to be joined by, and I can't stop smiling when I say his name because he is such a fantastic human being doing such an incredible job, such a patriot for our country. Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, will be joining us shortly, too. So we want to thank you all for joining us at this very special event. There's a lot of things you could do with your time. You made a choice and an investment, and a wise one, I'd say, by being here today for this fantastic panel. Thank you so much. Look forward to speaking with the rest of you later on this afternoon. And Curtis, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. Let's have a seat and get started. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thanks everybody on the panel for being here and making the time. So, look, the first question is, really, why did we need a tax cut? This is the biggest tax overhaul in a generation. Now, we have people here who helped write it. We have a man who was intimately involved in bringing the Senate and the House together. So let's just start there. Why did we need a tax overhaul?
Well, Curtis, first, thank you for being here. Kimberly, thank you, and Sheriff, and great to be here with my colleagues. We needed it badly because under the previous 8 years, what had happened? You had flat economic growth, 1.5, 2% growth. Wages, not just flat, but actually declining when you include inflation in the mix. And, you know, people couldn't get ahead. And so we said, when Donald Trump was running for office and when he got elected, we kept the majorities, we're going to actually fix this thing. We're going to give people the ability to keep more of their hard-earned money. We're going to help businesses to be able to invest here. We're also going to help on the regulation side, which we'll talk about later. And that combination has been unbelievable. I mean, I got to tell you, I know that sometimes folks on the other side say that this was all about tax cuts for big companies and wealthy individuals. That's just not true. I'm going all over the state of Ohio. I've been to over 20 businesses. We've had over a dozen roundtable discussions with small businesses. This thing is working. People are seeing higher wages. They're seeing bonuses. They're seeing higher 401ks. They're seeing better health care. They're seeing investments in them, in their training, in their plant and equipment so they can be more productive and efficient. I mean, it's really exciting what's going on, and the numbers are coming in. I mean, we just had another report from the Congressional Budget Office this week saying They're estimating now another $4 trillion is going to come to our economic growth, GDP, over the next 10 years compared to what they just estimated just before the tax cuts. Think about that. So yeah, it's going to generate more economic activity, more revenue, but the good way, through growth. And every family in Ohio is affected by this. 90% of people who are working in Ohio got a paycheck that said, you know what, Uncle Sam's going to take less out of it. That was kind of nice, wasn't it? We like that. Yeah. $2,000 on average for a family in Ohio, median income, $2,000 on average. And if you're working paycheck to paycheck, having a tough time making ends meet, this is real. And then the real exciting part on the business side, literally over $300 billion came into our country from overseas just in the first 3 months after this tax bill was passed. You may not read about that or hear about it. That's true. That's invested in America. That's compared to last year, only $38 billion coming in at the same time. Think of that, $300 billion versus $38 billion. That tells a lot of the story here, and we're really excited about it.
I'm going to leave now. I'm going to turn it over to Senator Portman. Well, we have, as you said, hundreds of companies around the country. Millions of Americans have seen pay raises, bonuses, lower utility rates as a result of this tax cut. What have we seen in Ohio, in Cincinnati, in the 2nd District, the 1st District, around the state? Tell us.
I could probably give you an example of that. Speaker Paul Ryan happened to come to Cincinnati about a month ago, and we went to a Kroger facility up in Sharonville. We met with a lot of the employees there at Kroger's, and they indicated that they're splitting the money up that they get in many ways with their employees. Their education accounts are going up. Their retiring accounts, the contribution from the company for their retirement accounts are going up. Also, the people got higher wages as well. There have been some left-wing organizations running ads here. You've probably seen them saying that the tax cut went to the 1%. The tax cut went to virtually everybody. About 85–90% of Americans are paying less taxes as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act than they were previously. So it's very important. I also happen to be the chairman of the House Small Business Committee, and we got a lot of small businesses all across the greater Cincinnati area, and they're benefiting particularly, as are their employees. About 70% of the new jobs in America are created by small businesses. They're the backbone of the American economy. So middle-class folks, small business folks are benefiting. Yes, some of the corporations also get some benefit, and their employees are sharing in it. There were bonuses and all kinds of things. So cutting America's taxes, right thing to do.
For everybody.
For everybody.
And you know, thanks, Steve. It was long overdue. We haven't changed our tax code since 1986, and the world has changed, and so many things have changed. This has been a great driver. I was just talking last night to a guy who has a sports apparel business, and he was saying that his average pay for his employees now has gone from about $12 an hour up to about $16.
16.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge difference, right?
Sure.
So it has this effect across the board. Small businesses, large businesses, we've seen the bonuses, we've seen all these things happen. And also, I represent out into the farmland, and they're not upset with it either, because there's a lot of advantages to their businesses now, and they see opportunities to grow. So, like I said, it was long overdue. It's here now, and people are taking advantage of it, and it's very multifaceted as far as the benefits.
I would agree. Look, I've traveled the state now. There are over 40 companies I've met with that have given tax cuts, whether it's Smucker's giving money back to their employees in bonuses. This is and it's funny, even traveling around when I go to a hotel and the bellman says thank you for those dollars that I got. Or I was at a fast food restaurant the other day and said, I want to really thank you for that extra money I got in my paycheck. Those aren't crumbs, $200 a month or $150 a month. That's a car payment. Yep. That's putting more money aside for college education. A lot of good things that are happening because people have a little bit more money in their pocket. And by the way, who better to spend it than them and giving it to the federal government and spend it? This is a great opportunity.
That's a good point. A couple of things that you said. For example, the wages going from $12 an hour to $16 an hour. Now, a lot of our liberal friends have been campaigning for years talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 and pass a law, mandate what everybody has to pay. Well, this tax cut, President Trump and the Republican Congress managed to accomplish that. without passing a law telling everybody what they have to do, wages have now gone up. So they can stop complaining. They should be thanking us, right? Everybody should say, great. Yeah. We now have a higher minimum wage that's gone up. And
there's some new information out on wages. It's pretty exciting because it says that for the first time, really in a decade and a half, we're seeing wages going up relative to, you know, the cost of everything, and particularly healthcare. And there's new numbers just came out said that this is the highest wage growth a couple months ago and up to, you know, in the second quarter that we've had in 9 years in this country. That's nice to see, you know. So we're actually seeing increases in wages, but it's not just wages, because people are seeing, as Steve said, Brad said, higher 401k, better healthcare benefits. You mentioned Kroger. That's one thing Kroger's doing, putting more money in the 401k. But I've seen that all over the state. So it may not show up exactly in wages, but people are having higher take-home pay in essence because their expenses are down a little bit because there's a better economy out there. So it's very positive.
Yeah, and you were saying about putting more money in people's pockets. So let's talk about the standard deduction. What was the law concerning the standard deduction for couples and families? How was it under the old law, and how has that changed under the tax cut? Now, Mr. Renacci, you were on the Ways and Means Committee. You helped write this law, so I'm going to throw that question to you first.
Well, not only that, I'm a CPA, so I had actually people come to my office with those boxes of paper, and here's what really happens. People think they have a standard deduction, but they don't have enough expense to get past that minimum. The minimum was $12,000 per family. We've doubled that now. So before, even though people thought they were getting a deduction, 70% of Americans were not able to use the deduction because they didn't meet the standard deduction. Today, now that we've doubled it, 90%, 94% actually, between 90 and 94% will not use the standard deduction. You talk about simplification. I was one of those guys in my firm where we watch people come in with boxes of paper and say, I don't know what I got here, but here's a whole bunch of bills. We've simplified it for Americans too. That's what was part of this tax bill. Let's not only cut taxes, let's simplify it. We were able to do that because now there'll be less people having to bring those boxes into a CPA firm and say, can I take the standard deduction or do I need my actual expenses?
You're getting hate mail from H&R Block?
They're still busy. Yeah.
Let's talk about how this tax cut was designed to boost the economy. So we hear, I guess, putting more money in people's pockets, doubling the standard deduction, that's money that people are going to spend. We don't need a government stimulus program spending $1 trillion on shovel-ready projects. You all get to decide how you want to spend the money, and that'll stimulate the economy. But what are some of the other factors that have been built in, such as expensing?
Yeah, there's so many things to talk about in this one thing. Let me just focus on one, then I'll let my colleagues take the other part. And that's allowing, again, small businesses or other people to take equipment that they purchase, and they can take it right off their taxes in that year. So if somebody goes out and has to buy a refrigeration unit or something like that, maybe it's $100,000, they don't have to depreciate it over time. They can take it all off in the first year. So that really helps them. And I've had employers say that they hired new people because they got that equipment in. That's why we're seeing the unemployment rate come down below 4% at this point in time, which is great. So being able to expense stuff in the first year is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And I would also add, I'm going to go back to simplification, because not only was a business guy, but a CPA. If you have to keep records on all of those and do depreciation records, a lot of people forget that. You got to write that equipment off over 5 years or 10 years. We've now simplified it even more now. Now you get the expense, you get the tax write-off, and you've simplified the tax code, which again is a big, big issue. Look, I was part of that. In 1986, I saw that original tax code as a young kid. We haven't changed anything until now, and we've now changed it to the better, and we've definitely simplified it as well.
You know, I didn't have a real appreciation of this, just how twisted the old tax code was until I started doing these panels. I mean, think about it. You're a business, and you earned enough money that you could afford to buy that $100,000 refrigeration unit. So you've got to pay taxes on that $100,000, all that money you earned under the old code. Yeah. And even if you went out and bought new equipment, so you've now spent $100,000, but you still have to pay full taxes on that $100,000. So what are you going to do? You're not going to buy the equipment because you've got to pay the tax man instead. But under the new deal, you can actually go out and start investing in your business, hiring people, and you're not going to get dinged by the tax man saying, well, you made so much money, you better pay me now.
Curtis, it's true. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet today
I know this is a nonpartisan setting, and here we are and talking policy, which is good. But we have to realize that something like bonus depreciation, which is what Jim was talking about, where you can get 100% write-off, which for the small business people out there in the audience, you love that, right? I mean, you want that write-off. You're using it. But under our crazy rules, the budget rules in the Congress, we had to make that temporary. So it actually expires. So that if there's a change in administration or a change in the Congress, think about this, there doesn't have to be a vote. It's just that they decide they're not going to extend it. So this is why a lot of us are saying it's important to think about the future as well. We don't want these taxes to go up again. We don't want businesses to say, you know what, I'm not going to make that investment, take that risk, hire these people. So it really matters who's there in terms of the administration and Congress. That's all I'm saying. It's a policy issue. Absolutely. And a lot of these individual tax cuts, you know, they do expire. So you got to be sure that you don't have people in office who are just going to say, well, we'll let them expire, because what is that? That's a tax increase. Yeah.
We have another member of the Ways and Means Committee here, Mr. Wentz.
Thank you. And going back to the point with the writing off the equipment in the first year, that's been a huge boost to our farmers. And I don't know when the last time many people here actually spend time out on a farm with some of our farmers. The equipment that they use today is highly sophisticated. That's why they're able to maximize their crops and produce more. And this is a big deal for them. It's made a huge difference for them, for sure.
You know, when we talk about small businesses and whatnot, something we did in previous, I've done a few stops here with the Vice President, a few different places, with Mr. Portman too. I'm going to ask everybody in the audience now, how many of you own a small business? You'd raise your hand. Keep your hands up now. How many of you know somebody who works for a small business? And okay. How many of you shop at a small business, went to a dry cleaner, a grocery store, a deli? Well, so when we talk about small businesses, we're talking about just about everybody. So it's not the 1% that we're talking about. Because we always talk about, you know, these tax cuts are for everybody, and and also the tax cut helps families to pay for child care as well. How does that work?
Yeah, doubled the child care credit, so twice as much. I mean, which is going to be a real boon to a lot of parents who obviously have to work and take care of the kids at the same time. So, and that can be, you know, it can be the difference between when you have a job and depending on how much child care you're paying, how much you're actually able to bring home. Is it even worth working? So that's something that has to be considered. This will help working parents a great deal.
And there was a huge effort in this whole process to address as many issues that people have that might prevent them from seeking greater opportunity, expanding their business, and go forward. And that's just one more example of it.
Yeah. You talk about that, a huge effort to make sure that it addresses a lot of aspects. We've heard in the media, you kind of get sometimes get the idea, because I've heard it somewhere, that this tax cut was just rushed through. That it was like 6 weeks, it came out of nowhere, and then it was like hatched, fully formed in 6 weeks. Is that really the case? You all were involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, as a lot of people in this audience know, I've been talking about this, as has Steve and Brad and others, Jim, for many, many, many years, over a dozen years, just talking about how to change the business side. Because you asked earlier about this effect of this tax code on workers and on businesses. I mean, we had the highest business rate in the entire world. When Ronald Reagan put it in place, by the way, it was below the average. Then every other country in the world said, aha, we're going to steal American jobs and investment, and they took their rates down. So I've been talking about this for a dozen years, so it wasn't new. It was something that, frankly, President Obama used to talk about sometimes. We could never get the Obama administration to work with us on it. Mm-hmm. And so you had a new administration coming in with a fresh look at it, a lot of business people involved on the administration side saying, yeah, let's fix this. I talked about the $300 billion that's come back just in the first quarter. That's money that's invested in America. And now we have a situation where for the companies here in Greater Cincinnati, whether it's General Electric, whether it's Procter, I see Kroger's here, other companies, it's in their interest to invest in America now rather than invest overseas. It's a huge difference. And that, over the long haul, may be the biggest difference of all for our overall economy, is that now America is the best place to do business. And so I think for those who say it's rushed through, I mean, you know, we've been working on this a long time. We just didn't have the cooperation of the other side of the aisle to get it done. Now we have gotten it done to the point that I think we're going to see continued investment and continued economic growth just because of these tax cuts and tax.
I was going to say, I would also add that I've been on Ways and Means for 6 years. 6 years ago, Chairman Camp, we started dissecting the tax code. We had multiple hearings, multiple Republican and Democrat settings where we talked about every line item on the tax code. That was 6 years ago. So it's not like it just started 6 months ago. We actually revised it. That was H.R. 1. So anybody who wants to go back, they're going to see Republicans and Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee ripped this thing apart and looked at all kind of ideas. But we didn't have the cooperation, as Senator Portman said, from the administration. So we kept looking at it. Now we knew we had cooperation. We had already done our homework. That's when we put the bill together on the Ways and Means Committee.
So we've seen this as a well-crafted bill. Took a lot of time. We're seeing the great results of it already. And as you said, going forward, real quick here, each one of you, what do you expect to see going forward? One word.
Continued growth.
Mr. Wenstrom.
And we are going to continue to tweak it, and if there's any technical changes that need to be made, we're going to do that. We're also going to do everything we can to encourage people to invest in their future and in their retirements as part of this process.
And Mr. Shabbat.
I would say you ought to keep your money, you earned it, and don't let the bureaucrats up in Washington have it.
Yay! Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. I'm going to ask everybody, let's give the panel a big round of applause here. Put your hands together. And we'll be joined very soon by the greatest vice president America's ever had, Mr. Mike Pence. Come on. All right.
Before tax reform, Americans were paying more taxes than ever, and our businesses were being taxed higher than any other nation in the industrialized world.
Our self-destructive tax code cost Americans millions and millions of jobs, trillions of dollars. The tax code is so complicated that more than 90% of Americans need professional help to do their own taxes. This enormous complexity is very unfair.
Even worse, jobs and companies moved overseas, wages sat stagnant, and economic hovered around 2%.
We need a competitive tax code that creates more jobs and higher wages for Americans. It's time to give American workers the pay raise that they've been looking for many, many years. $3.2 trillion, just think of it, in tax cuts for American families, including doubling the standard deduction and doubling the child tax credit. The typical family of four earning $75,000 will see an income tax cut of more than $2,000.
This gets us better wages, bigger paychecks, a simpler tax system. This gets the American economy competitive in the global economy.
We are going to bring at least $4 trillion back into this country, money that was frozen overseas.
People see their paychecks getting bigger in February because withholding tables have adjusted to reflect their tax cuts. When businesses are keeping more of what they earn, when they can write off their expensing investments in their businesses and hire more people.
The results have been bigger than anyone thought possible.
AT&T plans to increase U.S. capital spending $1 billion and provide $1,000 special bonus to more than 200,000 U.S. employees, and that's because of what we did.
AT&T, Bank of America, Comcast, American Airlines, Walmart. Hundreds of companies are giving employees nearly $2 billion in annual bonuses and raises. Major corporations like Apple are bringing billions of dollars back home.
This economy is already rolling at 3% growth, which people told the president during the campaign.
They laughed at him.
They laughed. They said it would take years to get to 3%. Letting the American people keep more of what they earn, by letting middle-income Americans have more spending power, by lowering taxes on businesses large and small, that we're going to outperform those growth projections.
Rising wages, growing business, a booming economy. Tax reform is putting American workers first and creating a new era of prosperity for our businesses and families. After years of stagnation, recession, and hardship, America is back.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the U.S. Senator for the state of Ohio, Rob Portman.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. That was a great panel, wasn't it? I wish everybody in America could have heard about that, and I wish we could hear even more from you, but you know what we've got now is a very special treat. The Vice President of the United States is among us, and I got to tell you, Mike Pence is not just a dear friend. Jen and I have known Karen and Mike a long time, but he is doing a great job for our country. I work in the United States Senate, as you know, and every day I get to work with Mike Pence and his people because he's involved in everything. Very involved in the tax cuts and the tax reform we talked about, but also regulatory relief. Right now, he's taking the lead and trying to ensure that Brett Kavanaugh is the next Supreme Court Justice for the United States Supreme Court. Great guy. So we're blessed to have him where he is, and we're blessed to have him here in the Queen City. My honor now, though, is to introduce to the stage our guy, Steve Shabbat. Steve has been, as you know, here in Cincinnati on city council. He's been county commissioner. He's been our congressman from the 1st District for many years, and he is a hard worker. No one works harder. He's also a guy who's acquired a lot of influence in D.C. because he's chairman of the Small Business Committee. We said earlier, how many are involved in small business? About every hand went up. Steve Shabbat fought for small businesses in the tax reform package. I'll tell you that. I heard from him a lot. Steve Shabbat is a guy who cares so much about his district, his constituents. We got to be sure that Steve Shabbat continues to serve, my friends. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman of the Small Business Committee, Congressman Steve Shabbat.
Thank you very much, Rob. We're really blessed to have, I think, one of the best United States senators that we've ever had in Ohio. Let's hear it for Rob Portman again. And I get to introduce the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. So what a cool thing to do. Mike and I go way back 30 years. Back in 1988, we both actually ran for Congress, for the House of Representatives for the first time. Even went to campaign school together. Yes, there is such a thing. It's only over one weekend. And we both lost that year. And then I ran again in 94, finally won in 94. That was 6 years later, Newt Gingrich, the contract with America. Mike ran 6 years after that in 2001, and we served together for 10 years in the United States Congress. And he was a great member of Congress for those 10 years, and then he went off to be a great governor of the state right next door, Indiana. Let's hear for it. Did a great job there, and then President Trump picked him to be his running mate, and the rest is history. Thank God for this country. So let me introduce the guy that I used to call Mike, and now I call Mike. I call him the greatest Vice President of the United States since John Adams. Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your great service in Washington, D.C. Steve Shabbat is simply one of the most principled public servants, a man of conviction and integrity. He has served Ohio and America with great distinction, and Steve Shabbat needs to be sent back to Washington, D.C., Ohio. Give him another round of applause, would you? What a great guy and a great friend. And it is great to be back in the Buckeye State, in the Queen City, And I want to bring greetings not only to the people of Ohio, but also we got some Hoosiers in the house. We got some Kentuckians in the house. In fact, now that I think of it, all 3 of those states voted to make President Donald Trump the 45th President of the United States of America. So thank you. Thanks to Ohio and Kentucky and to my home state of Indiana. And I bring greetings from that president today. We were chatting last night, and he's back in the White House in Washington, D.C., but I told him I was going to be here in Cincinnati, and I think if you know anything about the history of our president, you know how special Cincinnati is to him. It was actually where one of his first projects began in his long and storied career. But I got to tell you, President Donald Trump and I love Ohio because Ohio voted to send this president to the White House. So thank you, Ohio. I also want to say thanks to these great Ohio conservatives in Congress, all they do to represent the people of this state, and just as importantly, for the strong partnership that they've provided to this administration. Now, I have to tell you, you heard from him just a second ago. You heard from this great panel. But I'll tell you, I think all of Ohio and America should be proud of the service of Senator Rob Portman. He has done an incredible job for this state and for this nation. And I'm honored to be here with him today. Also, not only Steve Shabbat, but join me in thanking my 2 other friends, Congressman Brad Wenstrup and Congressman Jim Renacci. These are outstanding leaders. I'll have more to say about them in a minute, but I'm really grateful that they're here. And also grateful to our host today who brought us all together for this event. Let's hear it for America First Policies that's been organizing these events all over America so we can talk about these tax cuts. Talk about these tax cuts that have this economy moving. But thank you all for being here. I'm very humbled by your presence today, and it really is great. Great to be back in the heartland of America. To reflect for just a few moments with all of you on the last year and a half. You know, when I think about it, there's only one way you can describe the last 18 months. It's been a year and a half of action. It's been a year and a half of results. It's been a year and a half of promises made and promises kept. And we're just getting started. It's true. I mean, think about it. Think about it. We're going to talk about these tax cuts in a minute, but the list is a whole lot longer than that. This president promised to make the strongest military in the history of the world stronger still, and earlier this year, President Trump signed one of the largest increases in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. Just yesterday at Fort Drum in New York, we were both up that way. In support of these great leaders in Congress, the President signed legislation that paves the way for the largest investment in our national defense in more than a generation. This legislation is going to give the more than 100,000 men and women in uniform from Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana not only the respect they deserve, not only the resources and training they deserve, but it's going to give our men and women in uniform the biggest pay raise our soldiers have received in more than 10 years, and they deserve every cent. The bill the President signed yesterday also fortify America's industrial base. You know, the President said it at Fort Drum yesterday. We invest in our national defense to keep our nation safe, secure, to provide for the common defense. But the truth of the matter is that the resources that we provide our soldiers are made right here in the USA. And thanks to this new legislation, we're going to be investing in ways that will not only create a more secure America, but will support American prosperity. In fact, this legislation invests about $1.5 billion to upgrade 131 M1 Abrams tanks for the United States Army. And if you didn't know about it, those upgraded tanks are going to be rolling off the production line right here in the Buckeye State. A safer America and a more prosperous Ohio. fact, in the same legislation, the President articulated a vision to ensure continued American dominance, not just on land, sea, and air, but also in the new frontier of outer space. And we are already taking steps to establish the 6th branch of our armed forces, the United States Space Force. So, we've been keeping our promise to rebuild our military, restore the arsenal of democracy, to give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard the resources and training they need to accomplish their mission and come home safe. It's the first priority of your national government, is to provide for the common defense. And I'll tell you what, this president's strength and his heart were on display. Just most notably a couple short weeks ago, and many of you saw it. It was in June at a historic summit. President Trump sat down for negotiations with the leader of North Korea. And while he secured a commitment for the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, President Donald Trump also had our missing fallen on his heart. And he secured a commitment for the return of the remains of all the MIA service members from the Korean War. Thanks to President Donald Trump, our boys are coming home. You know, for this son of a combat veteran from the Korean War, I'll tell you, I told the president he'll probably never give me a greater honor than representing him at the first homecoming ceremony of our soldiers in Hawaii just a few short weeks ago. It was deeply inspiring. And as the president said yesterday at Fort Drum, here in this great nation, we stand for the principle that we stand with all of those who serve and have served, and we leave no one behind. Closer to home, this president promised to enforce our laws and secure our borders. From the first day of this administration, I'm proud to say, we've been giving law enforcement the resources and the respect they deserve. You know, the truth of the matter is there's a lot of members of law enforcement who are in the room today. And if you haven't noticed, the last couple of years have been pretty challenging on the men and women who serve on the thin blue line. But the truth of the matter is this administration will always stand with those who serve in law enforcement at every level, and that includes the heroic men and women of immigrations and customs enforcement. Sure. I mean, the men and women of ICE, you should know, go to work every day to keep our families and our country safe. And while there's some leading liberals around the country who are actually calling to abolish this agency, I want to say to you, the courageous men and women of ICE deserve the support of every American, and they will always have the support of the Trump administration. I promise you that. Under this president, we will never abolish ICE. And with that renewed commitment to immigration enforcement, this president's actually enacted the largest funding increase for border security in nearly a decade. And we've already started to build that wall on the southern border of the United States. And we're going to build it all. This president also promised to appoint strong conservatives to our federal courts at every level. And last month, President Trump set a record for the most Court of Appeals judges confirmed in the first 2 years of any administration in American history, and they are conservatives all. And that doesn't even include Justice Neil Gorsuch or the next great justice to the Supreme Court of the United States, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. So it's about promises made and promises kept. But what brings us here today is that this president kept our promise to get this economy moving again. From the first day of this administration, we've been working to unleash the full potential of the American economy. I mean, think about it. For the last 16 years, the most powerful economy in the history of the world grew on an average of about 2%. It's just incredible. But just in case you haven't noticed, since President Trump took office, confidence is back. Jobs are coming back. In a word, America is back, and we're just getting started. And it didn't just happen. It didn't just happen. We promised to roll back the heavy hand of government, and this president signed more laws repealing federal red tape already than any president in American history. We promised to unleash American energy. We approved the Keystone and Dakota pipelines right out of the gate. We rolled back the Clean Power Plan that was pressing down on the utility rates of people across the heartland. And President Trump put America first when he withdrew the United States of America from the job-killing Paris Climate Accord. And under this president, the war on coal is over. We also promised along the way to confront countries that, quite frankly, have been taking advantage of America on trade for far too long. And since the outset of this administration, this president has taken decisive action to defend our steel and aluminum industries, the backbone of our economy and our security. We promised to deliver for America's farmers, just like they deliver for us every day. As we speak, we're working with these very same members of Congress to pass a multi-year farm bill that'll provide rural America and all of our farmers with the long-term certainty they need to prosper and thrive. And being from the Hoosier State, I know just how important agriculture is all across the heartland. Now, let me say to all of you who work on the farm or near the farm, we understand that there's some concern among farmers about trade. But the truth is our farmers haven't been treated fairly by our trading partners in the past. They're not being treated fairly by most countries right now. Too many countries, frankly, have closed the door to American goods, not just what we make, but what we grow. And rather than change their behavior, foreign nations are now targeting our farmers as never before. Well, let me make you a promise. Our administration is going to fight every day for new and better trade deals that are free and fair and reciprocal and are a win for American workers in the city and on the farm. We're going to do it. And we're making progress. We're making progress. As I stand before you today, we're working with Canada, Mexico, Japan, and the European Union, other trading partners around the world. We've made real steps forward, opening new markets for American pork, beef, wheat, corn, potatoes, soybeans, and so much more. But there's a lot more work to do, and we're just getting started. So today, let me just say again to each and all of you and all those that are looking on, in this White House, we will not rest or relent until we have international trade that puts American jobs and American workers first. That's all part of it. That's all what's contributing to this growing economy. But the last promise kept is the one I wanted to emphasize today and talk to you all about particularly. It's what the panel talked about today. This president promised to cut taxes. When we were campaigning through Ohio, all across this state, we promised to cut taxes across the board for working families, for businesses, for family farms. And right before Christmas, with the strong support of these very same conservative leaders in the Congress, we enacted the largest tax cuts and tax reform in American history. That's promises made and promises kept. I mean, we cut taxes for working families. The typical family of four in the Cincinnati area, I'm told, will save more than $2,500 a year on their taxes when all these tax cuts take effect. We cut taxes for businesses, large and small, so that businesses in Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana can compete and win against businesses anywhere in the world. We're competitive again. We repealed the death tax for nearly every American farmer so the family farm can stay right where it belongs. And when we cut taxes, in case you didn't notice, we cut out the core of Obamacare. The individual mandate is gone. It's off the books. We've done all this because of strong support of majorities in Congress, including the great leaders that are gathered here. But the people of Ohio deserve to know, quite frankly, we've done it all in the face of unprecedented obstruction and opposition by liberals in Washington, D.C. The truth is, everything I just recited to you, everything we've done to get this economy moving again, we've done despite the consistent opposition of Chuck Schumer and Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown. It's the truth. I mean, last year, Senator Sherrod Brown said that he wanted, in his words, to, quote, work together to pass tax cuts for working families. When he actually had the opportunity to vote to cut your taxes, Sherrod Brown voted no. When the time came to cut taxes on Ohio's farmers and manufacturers, Sherrod Brown voted no. And it's not just tax cuts. When the time came to crack down on sanctuary cities, to repeal and replace Obamacare, and even when we had the opportunity to give states like Ohio the authority to defund the largest abortion provider in America, Sherrod Brown voted no every single time. And when it comes to the Supreme Court, Sherrod Brown voted no on Justice Neil Gorsuch. And even though it's been more than a month since the president nominated Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, Senator Brown still won't say whether he supports our nominee. Now, let me be clear on that point. Judge Brett Kavanaugh is a man of integrity with a proven record of support for limited government, the Second Amendment, and religious liberty, and he deserves the support of every member of the United States Senate. He just does. And I call on Senator Sherrod Brown today. Set politics aside. Senator, give our nominee a fair hearing and the support he deserves. And if Sherrod Brown won't vote to confirm a judge like Brett Kavanaugh, Ohio needs to send us a new senator who will. Now, the good news is, despite the opposition of liberals like Sherrod Brown, we've been able to deliver remarkable results. I mean, just look at these tax cuts. I mean, Senator Brown said they actually wouldn't put real money in your pockets, but thanks to these tax cuts, more than 6 million Americans have already received bonuses, pay raises, and bigger benefits, including 125,000 workers all across this state. Cincinnati's own Fifth Third Bank is raising wages for its nearly 3,000 hourly employees, and it gave out a $1,000 bonus to more than 13,000 workers. Fiat Chrysler used its tax cut savings to give a $2,000 bonus to more than 5,000 workers in the Buckeye State, and Walmart, AT&T, Wells Fargo, and countless other companies, large and small, are giving bonuses and raises across this area, and that's just the beginning. Because thanks to our tax cuts in the years ahead, we think the average wages of working families in this region is going to rise by more than $4,000 a year. That's real money in your pockets in Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana. I mean, the truth of the matter is, some of these folks in Washington, D.C. don't really think $1,000 for a working family is much. I don't know if you heard it, but the woman who wants to be Speaker of the House again, Nancy Pelosi. Actually, remember that? Right when we heard that literally companies all across Ohio and all across America were passing out $1,000 bonuses at the end of last year, she said that those bonuses were nothing more than crumbs. Remember hearing that? And frankly, we've heard liberals around the country saying that, echoing that same theme. Well, let me remind you, Karen and I come from what I call the Walmart wing of the West Wing of the White House. Are you with me on that one? Okay, thanks. I mean, we've lived on a budget every day of our lives. 33 years of marriage, we've never not lived on a budget. I mean, we had a saying when our kids were little, $1,000 in my paycheck at the end of the year that we weren't expecting to get. We had a term for that. Christmas. Are you with me? All right. Now, let me say very seriously, though. Any leader who says that $1,000 in the pockets of working families here in Ohio is crumbs is out of touch with the American people and should never lead the American Congress again. That's true. I mean, these tax cuts, all of our agenda since Election Day 2016, they've produced real results. I mean, businesses large and small have created nearly 4 million new jobs, including 16,000 new jobs across the Cincinnati metro area alone. Unemployment claims, as I stand before you today, have hit a nearly 50-year low, and the President and I couldn't be more proud that we've set a new record, the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded for Hispanic Americans and African Americans in American history. The American dream is working again for every American. Sure. And after 8 years of slow growth under the last administration, when I mentioned the economy grew by less than 2%, I'm sure you saw the headlines a couple weeks ago. We just reached growth of more than 4%. Now, the liberal pundits, I remember in the campaign, I remember they said it couldn't be done, but President Trump just did it. The truth of the matter is...
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here for this America First Policies event in Cincinnati. You're watching Vice President Pence speak live to this crowd here in Cincinnati. We are also anxiously awaiting what is said to be a full packed house at the University of Maryland, awaiting the president, Wallace Lowe, and the athletic director to come out and speak regarding the death of football player Jordan McNair and ultimately what the fate of Coach D.J. Durkin is going to be. So we have that shot kind of up and ready. We're going to switch right over to that when it starts up, continue to watch this live event here in Ohio, and then switch it over to that press conference. It's slated to start around 2 p.m. Eastern time. It is a little bit late, so we'll jump right in there when it is ready.
But it's also been because of the support of these great leaders in the Congress of the United States. Congressman Brad Wenstrup served this country in the United States Army. He's now serving the good people of Southern Ohio. And across the board, he has served with distinction. He voted to cut your taxes. He's voted to make our military stronger. And Congressman Brad Wenstrup deserves the support of all the people of Ohio. Stand up, Brad, would you? What a great America. Thank you, Brad. And Congressman Steve Shabbat, I mentioned him before, but I got to mention him again. He's the son of Cincinnati. He told you we met each other back in 1988 when we both lost an election. What an incredible man. I mean, he's literally fought tirelessly for this hometown, for his home state for more than 20 years. And as I said before, I served with him in Congress. I never served with a better man. His devotion to taxpayers, his devotion to our national security, his commitment to traditional values and the sanctity of human life is among the best and the strongest I ever witnessed in the Congress of the United States. He leads the Small Business Committee. We wouldn't have gotten these tax cuts done without Congressman Steve Shabbat. And I got to tell you, Ohio needs Congressman Steve Shabbat back in Washington, D.C. this fall. And lastly, let me mention a friend of mine named Jim Renacci. Congressman Jim Renacci and I got to know each other even before he was elected to the Congress of the United States. I like to say I was for Jim Renacci before it was cool. I really was. I mean, here was someone who had built an incredible business. He'd really lived the American dream. But he felt that calling on his life to give back. He felt a calling on his life to go to Washington, D.C. and fight for other small business owners and other families. And that's exactly what he's done. During the course of the last 18 months alone,
patiently waiting here, the president of University of Maryland. Looks like they are getting ready there with the camera. And I don't want to pull away too soon, but I do want to take you over briefly to the family. If you remember Tia Coleman from the duck boat tragedy, she lost most of her family in that accident in Missouri. She's speaking out for the first time since returning home. Right here, lower left of your screen. Let's take a listen for a second, then we're going to pop you over to the University of Maryland when that does start up.
When I will be going crazy because everybody's running around calling me, Tia, mommy, mommy, mommy. I can't get that back. I can't get any of that back. But the only thing that will make this better is that no other family has to go through what I went through. Especially since it's something that could be fixed. Thank you.
Do you still have a desire to help other families that will end up grieving by sharing your journey through the mourning and the grief?
I would love to. I don't know when, because I'm a mess myself. I'm a mess of emotions, but I would love to. I've always loved to help. That's what gives me joy. helping others.
Ma'am, during this whole process, your family has been quite the testimony of faith. That's what I've taken away, and I don't know you.
Okay.
But what I did notice during those days since the 19th is that your family has been very faithful. And even during the vigils and funerals, it was very uplifting in light of, one could always say, why me? And that was never the issue. How do you translate that then to your faith family, as those that watch you on this faith journey? Because this is something that no one can even conceive. How do you, as a mother, how do you just explain it when someone says to you, hey, what's going on?
Yeah. So, as I've stated plenty of times, I was raised in church. And I have a praying mother. I have praying family members. I pray. And I want to say this, I didn't even consider my faith to be strong, if that makes sense. I just know that when we're in our, going through our own individual tests, and literally for me through the storm, that's all I had at that point. All the family that I have, all the family that I had when I was out there in that water by myself, it felt like I was by myself because I couldn't see anybody. That's all I had was God. And I know that's the only way that I'm even here today. And so, and a lot of times, like when I'm by myself, I'll just talk to God and I'll say, Lord, I don't know why you did what you did, but I know you did it. And there's nothing I can do to get them back. So, and you left me here for a reason.
I'll tell you, we can take one more question, and then I think that's a wrap. If you could sum up that reason why God left you here, what would it be to you?
Okay, so at first I didn't know, right? Because I have no more children. The love of my life is gone. Why am I here, Lord? I always prayed to be a mother. That's one of the things I prayed for. So I'm like, Lord, why am I here? So last week,
we will all hear from two speakers, our president and our athletic director, Damon Evans. Following their remarks, our athletic director will remain at the podium for a brief Q&A. I will now invite to the podium the University of Maryland President, Wallace Stilo.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you all for being here this afternoon on relatively short notice. Damon and I just got back from Baltimore. We went there this morning to meet with the parents of Jordan McNair. And I want to meet with them in private to express, on behalf of the university, our apology for the loss of their son. I said to them, and I said I will be mentioning it publicly this afternoon, but I wanted them to hear it directly from me this morning. The university accepts legal and moral responsibility for the mistakes that our training staff made on that fateful workout day of May the 29th, which of course led subsequently to his death on June 13th. I explained to the parents that we have retained an expert team of sports medicine and physical athletic training personnel to do a thorough review of the circumstances and the facts of that case, as well as our protocols and procedures. And that when the final report is available, and they expect it will be available by middle of September, and it will be made public. And I said, when that report comes, I will come and present that report to you before we make it public. But I also explained that we've been getting progress reports. And based upon what we know at this time, even though the final report is not completed, I said to the family, the university owes you an apology. You entrusted Jordan to our care, and he is never returning home again. We have looked at the preliminary observations that were given to me and to others. Are some of our policies and protocols do not conform to best practices. Some of the actions of our athletic training staff, not the coaching staff, the athletic training staff, well, they basically misdiagnosed the situation. No vital signs were taken. Other safeguard actions that should have been taken were not. For me, that was enough to say, I need to come and personally apologize. And I know that we will do, not I know, I'm committed to doing the right thing. And nothing that we can do can bring closure to their enormous loss. But I made this commitment to the parents this morning, together with Athletic Director Damon Evans. We both made this commitment that no Maryland student athlete will ever be in a situation where his or her life and safety and life will be at risk, especially when that risk is foreseeable. I made that commitment to them. I'm making it now to all of our student athletes and the University of Maryland community and to all the people of Maryland. Once we have, and I should also say that safeguards have already begun. We provided additional training to athletic training staff. All sorts of things that we did not do are now in place. The second thing I want to address are the reported allegations that came out recently on conduct that is simply inappropriate, unacceptable, of bullying, intimidation, alleged intimidation, alleged denigration of student athletes. My office is set up to receive, and we receive lots and lots of expressions of concern and issues and problems from faculty, staff, students, and others. In this case, we learned about these allegations from the media. But regardless of the source, what is important is how we address it. And we are guided by certain key values: accountability of all employees, of transparency, and yes, a fair process. So as soon as we knew about this, got together with Damon Evans and others, and Director Evans, as you all know by now, put some staff on, coaching staff and training staff, on administrative leave. With regard to these allegations, which are very serious, they are totally inconsistent with what we stand for and our values, which is about education, preparing student athletes for life, and to be treated with respect and dignity. You can motivate people, push them to the limit without engaging in bullying behavior. But these are allegations. But we have to take them very, very seriously. And so what fair process demands is that we do a thorough investigation by an independent group, and they make recommendations, and we will implement those recommendations, and we will monitor the continuing implementation of those recommendations. To that end, I thought long and hard and put together a team, a commission of 4 individuals who will immediately, in fact, we've already met to begin the process of this review of the practices and the culture of the football program. They are the Honorable Ben Legg, retired Chief Judge of the United States District Court for Maryland. It is the Honorable Alex Williams, retired Judge of the United States District of Maryland and former State's Attorney for Prince George's County. It's Charles Sheeler, Senior Counsel of DLA Piper, the global law firm with a branch in Baltimore, and he's in Baltimore, and everybody knows him. He was also a federal prosecutor for the United States Attorney's Office for Maryland. And one of the reasons I selected him is because he has a lot of experience in this area. He was the monitor appointed by the NCAA and the Big Ten Conference to monitor the integrity agreement, the implementation of that integrity agreement of Penn State after their scandal. And he was also the lead counsel in the investigation of steroid abuse in Major League Baseball. Those are 3, and the 4th and final one is a highly respected, retired head football coach and also athletic director. It is not yet finalized, but that name will be announced shortly. This is the team of 4 individuals who will interview students, student athletes, parents, coaches, staff, and other people who want to come forward, and provide a report that, based upon the work done by reporters and has been published. We take those reports very seriously, but I think due process does require us to lay out the facts, give people a chance to respond, and then we will act. But this is not going to take forever. There's going to be an expedited, but yet very careful review with all the confidentiality in terms of allowing people to speak confidentially and candidly. Let me just conclude by saying we will do everything possible that the situation that Jordan McNair found himself in will never happen again. And if we succeed, as I surely hope and expect that we will always keep alive the legacy of Jordan McNair. And the values of this university with regard to our student athletes will always be, you're here for an education, we're here to prepare you also for life, and we expect that all the people that you work with in the classroom and on the field comport with the values of respect and dignity and humane treatment.
Good afternoon. My name is Damon Evans, and I am the new athletic director at the University of Maryland. I want to begin by saying what I said to the parents of Jordan this morning, that we apologize for the mistakes that were made. I extend now that apology to his family, his friends, and his teammates. Today, I want to update our community on what we now know about the circumstances surrounding the death of our student athlete, Jordan McNair, and what changes we have already made to ensure that something like this never, ever happens again. In July, when I was named athletic director, my highest priority was to investigate the events surrounding this death. We needed to fully understand exactly what happened, how it happened, and ensure that it never happens again. To do so, we launched an independent review conducted by some of the leading experts in sports medicine, led by Rod Walters. That team has been interviewing our students, coaches, and training staff to determine how our staff responded that day. While the review is ongoing, we know enough now to share some of the preliminary findings. We have learned that Jordan did not receive appropriate medical care, and mistakes were made by some of our athletic training personnel. Specifically, in his preliminary observations, Walters found that the emergency response plan was not appropriately followed. Second, the care we provided was not consistent with best practices. And third, that heat illness was not promptly identified or treated. Our athletic training staff did not take Jordan's temperature and did not apply a cold water immersion treatment. I expect additional findings when the Walters report is complete. That report will be made public. We have already taken immediate steps to put additional safeguards in place for all of our athletic practices and training, not just football. We have changed how we practice and also how we train our staff. We have specifically changed how we practice in the heat by increasing breaks and adding cooling stations. I have also commissioned a second team of legal and sports experts who will review the recent allegations of unacceptable behaviors in our football program. I want to be clear that I have not witnessed any behavior as what was described in the media, but it is essential that we fully review these allegations, and that is why we are conducting an independent third-party review led by national leaders. Additionally, we have placed members of our training and coaching staff on administrative leave, including the head football coach, and have parted ways with one of our members. Make no mistake, we will not tolerate any behavior from any employee within Maryland athletics that is detrimental to the mental or physical well-being of our student athletes. There is nothing more important than our student athletes' safety. Absolutely nothing. Earlier today, President Lowe and I shared these preliminary findings with Jordan's mother and father. We shared our deepest apologies and sincere regrets. As a father, there are no words to say to Jordan's parents till they're good enough. I have looked into the eyes of a grieving mother and father, and there is simply nothing good enough. We will honor Jordan's life, and we will ensure that a tragedy such as this never happens on our campus again. by working every single day to provide the safest environment for our student athletes on and off the field. I will continue to keep all of you informed about our work. I ask that you keep Jordan's family, friends, and teammates in your prayers. Thank you.
Damon will now answer some questions. Our first question goes to AP, Dave Ginsburg.
Damon, you mentioned someone has already been dismissed. I was wondering whether you could tell us who that is. And secondly, with Coach Durkin on administrative leave and the report not expected to be ended until the middle of September, is it feasible that he could be on administrative leave 3 games into the season at that point?
The first part of your question, the individual that we parted ways with is our head strength and conditioning coach for football, Rick Court. And as far as Coach Durkin and administrative leave, obviously we've hired an external review team to take a look at this, but as additional information comes forward, we will do what's appropriate. So we'll move in that manner.
Next question goes to the Post. Jesse.
Damon, was this the first time that you, President Lowe, or anyone from the university met with Jordan's parents to apologize or speak about the situation? And if so, why wait 2 months after the situation happened?
This was not the first time that we met with Jordan's parents. We had the opportunity to meet Jordan's parents at the hospital. I know I was at the hospital for several days. Dr. Lowe also made a trip to the hospital, and I know in addition I made a call to them. But we felt that it was appropriate based upon the preliminary findings and being transparent that we should share those findings with them and yet again offer our condolences and our sincere regrets.
Question goes to the Sun. Don.
You said that you never witnessed any of the abuse. As when you were the senior liaison for the football team, do you feel that that was part of your responsibilities, and do you feel that that you were negligent in that area for not, seeing things that were happening?
As I'll restate, though I did not witness those things, today what we're focused on is making sure that we provide that safe environment. That has always been what we wanted to do. Dr. Lowe expressed the values that we hold high and dear as an institution, and we're going to make sure that we stick to those values and move forward.
Next question is ESPN. Heather.
Damon, on the day after Jordan died, you addressed the media and gave a timeline of your account. Were you at practice? If not, where did that timeline come from?
No, Heather, I was not at practice. We sat down and met with individuals on our staff to try to ascertain as best we could what transpired on that particular day, and we provided you with the information that we had at that time.
Next question goes to the Diamondback. Andy.
Big Time Media Days, DJ right here. Big Time Media Days, DJ Jerkin said players and coaches hadn't yet been interviewed. Why did it take about 2 months for players and coaches to be interviewed about the events that happened May 29th?
In a situation like this, we wanted to make sure that we understood everything. Our student athletes, we're focused on their health and the safety and the welfare and making sure that we provided them the necessary counseling. This was a time of grieving. We were focused on making sure that they were okay, making sure that we had people around them to support them. That was our first priority as it relates to what they were going through, a very, very difficult time.
Back to the Post. Barry.
What behavior did you find out about Rick Court that led you to dismiss him, and what responsibility does the head football coach have for the behavior of members of his staff?
When reading the article, in sports you always have some complaints that come forward, and we look at all of those and make the appropriate decisions in how to resolve them. When that report came out in ESPN, the severity of those allegations was significant. I sat down with Rick to ascertain what had transpired, and based upon conversations and looking at everything in totality, I felt it was in the best interest to put him on administrative leave. I'm sorry. You know, at the end of the day, we got to take a look at that. That's why we're having the external review led by a team of experts to see where we come out.
We're going to go back to the Sun, Peter.
Damon, dating back to 2001 and the Corey Stringer tragedy, the cold immersion treatment, temperature taking, these are very, very basic heat stroke treatments. The fact that your training staff did not do them, does that say something, a lapse in the employment, in the choosing and employment of your training staffs?
Well, obviously, we wanted to share those findings with you today because they're significant. Cold water immersions is an important part in this equation here. Obviously, we misdiagnosed and did not act accordingly, did not act appropriately and respond to Jordan's situation.
Over to the Athletic, Nicole.
Damon, do you believe that you should be responsible for a culture that was taking place under your head football coach?
My plan moving forward is to make sure that we evaluate that culture, those allegations of that culture, and make sure that the environment that we provide for our student athletes is one that is safe and conducive for them to learn and grow and develop, and that they have an overall good experience. I believe that I'm the one that can lead us through these very difficult times.
Dave Johnson, NBC4.
Talk about getting communication from, obviously, with Jordan McNair's parents. Are you getting a lot of hearing from a lot of parents of other student athletes wondering what is going on with the program? And if so, what kind of communication do you have with other programs, other parents of students during your programs?
We are having some communications from parents, and we welcome that communication. We think that is significant. I will be setting up a meeting with the parents here in the coming days to update them as well as take any questions as they might have. One of the things that is significantly important as we move forward with the external review, parents will be a part of that review to make sure that they can be heard because we want to ascertain as much information as possible as we try to get to the bottom of this.
Last question here in the back.
Hi, Tracy Wilkins, NBC4. Has the University of Maryland started to have conversations about policing itself ahead of any possible sanctions from the NCAA? If so, what is it that you all are willing to do?
As far as what we're going to focus on is making sure right now that we look into the allegations that were brought forth regarding the behavior. That is important. We've got to make sure that the protocols and the new recommendations that have come forward that we put in place as far as the health and the safety of our student athletes on the field, that we take care of that. We've got these issues that are at hand for us are extremely important for the welfare of our student athletes. That's what we're going to focus on. As far as the NCAA, I can't speak for them and whether or not what role they will play in this, but we're going to do what's appropriate. Internal investigation, Heather, we made some, we asked some questions about staff to learn what had transpired that day, but all along we felt that it was important to bring an independent outside consultant so there wouldn't be any conflicts of interest, someone who is an expert at doing this, and Rob Walters is that individual, and I think that is the best approach.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. This concludes today's press conference. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Well, there you have it, guys. The university launching an independent review of the football program and of the actions of Coach Durkin during that incident, and also of the athletic medical personnel team, finding that they went wrong on numerous occasions on that day, May 29th, that 19-year-old Jordan McNair collapsed, later died 2 weeks later in the hospital. I want to take you briefly right over to the White House press briefing. That is starting up right now. Sarah Sanders just walked to the podium. Let's jump over to the White House.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The August 1st repatriation and homecoming in Hawaii of the remains of the Korean War unaccounted for was a poignant manifestation of the commitment secured by President Trump and pledged by Chairman Kim at the Singapore summit. For the families of the 7,700 still unaccounted for from the Korean War, this first step in fulfilling this commitment has undoubtedly provided a seed of hope. Last week, over 700 of these family members gathered in Arlington, Virginia to receive government updates, and they were resoundingly appreciative of the successful advocacy of the president and his administration. Two of those family members who attended, Charles and Larry McDaniel, were the recipients of the dog tag their father, Master Sergeant Charles McDaniel of Indiana. It was a sole personal effect returned by the North Koreans. The remains of those 55 cases are well into the painstaking, multifaceted analyses by Dr. John Bird and his forensic science team in Hawaii, and in the coming weeks, Dr. Tim McMahon and his dedicated DNA specialists in Delaware will begin their meticulous testing. The mettle of our scientists and the capabilities of our labs will be challenged, but in the months and years ahead, they will make identifications from these remains and give families long-sought answers. We are guardedly optimistic the 1 August repatriation is the first tangible action of others with which we will be able to account for more of our missing from the Korean War. The second aspect of the Singapore commitment was the recovery of remains in North Korea, which DPRK officials reaffirmed last month. We are in the midst of exploring next steps as well as discussions with the Korean People's Army for the express purpose of resuming joint field operations and having additional repatriations. But our mission to search for, find, and account for missing Department of Defense personnel from World War II through Operation Iraqi Freedom is one not limited to the Korean Peninsula. Today, 186 personnel from DPA and private partners are deployed in 7 nations, and yesterday, 50 of those members returned from Laos and the Philippines. Our global mission is humanitarian in every respect, because the impact of a missing American to their family is not constrained by time or generations, and it leaves an enduring pain and void. This is why former enemies like Vietnam use cooperation on the POW-MIA mission as a bridge to normalization and today's thriving bilateral relationship with the United States. The fact that the United States of America vigorously pursues the fullest possible accounting of our missing reflects our values as a nation. This sacred obligation, if not moral imperative, remains a high priority for the Department of Defense. Inherent to the exceptional teamwork, resources, and resoluteness provided by multiple agencies is a solemn vow that those who were sent off in harm's way and are missing will not be forgotten, and their families will receive answers to their decades of uncertainty. My colleagues and I welcome your questions.
Gentlemen, I was with President Clinton in 2000 when he went to a place in Vietnam, north of Hanoi, where one of these recovery efforts were underway. So I have some familiarity with this. Even there, when things are discovered, it takes a long time to establish the trail forensically. I'd like to ask you both, what condition are the remains or the parts of remains you've received so far, and how challenging will the forensic work be ahead? Are you a long, long way, or was what you received something that gets you close to identifying and confirming?
We would characterize the preservation of the remains as moderate to poor.
as a general consideration. However, what our lab specializes in is making identifications in circumstances where you have very little to work with. And so I'm confident that we're going to do well with the remains in these 55 boxes over the coming months and maybe the next several years. When you look at what's at stake, we're going to be doing a lot of DNA sampling. And that's what Dr. McMahon's lab does, is they process the samples and then they go into a mass database where they can be compared to all of the other samples that we've generated from remains from North Korea, and also compared to the family members. And so it takes some time to get the samples processed through the lab at AFMES. It takes some time to get them into the mass comparison, but once they're in there, we'll start looking for the quick identifications that can be made where you have compelling matches that show themselves early on. We also look for comparisons to dental records that can be distinctive. We look for individuals that are unusual in the sense of being very tall, very short, very old. Anything that distinguishes somebody, we can usually get a good clue and identify them faster. But because of the preservation of the remains, that will just sort of guide the kinds of methods that we can bring to bear on the case. And the case will be very DNA intensive in terms of the way that we're going to go about this.
And the number of 55, what does that number represent? And
It's
is
the
that
number of
55
boxes.
individuals?
No, it's the number of boxes that the remains came in. And at no time did we expect there to be one body, one box, nor did the North Koreans try to pitch it that way to us when we were in Wonsan.
Mr. Director, thank you. What type of certainty do you have that the remains that the North Koreans have handed over to the Americans are that of missing Americans as opposed to other nationalities that fought alongside the Americans during the Korean War?
We have a high confidence. So in the early 90s, for 5 years, the North Koreans would repatriate unilaterally remains that they had recovered. Out of those 208 boxes over those 5 years, we estimated, after DNA sampling, 400 individuals. Now from that, 200 were Americans. So the likelihood is, you're correct, there may be some of UN sending forces, there may be some South Korean soldiers remains, as well as Chinese and North Korean. But our laboratories, both DNA and the forensic laboratory, have the technology and the capabilities by which to differentiate those remains over the course of the next several years.
Director, I think you mentioned you're in some discussions with the North Koreans about potential future actions, maybe to search for more remains and joint efforts as such. I think the Pentagon and Secretary Mattis have mentioned that. What, if I'm to understand right, the Bush administration ended the program in which U.S. officials would be helping search for the remains, in part because of security concerns for our own forces there. Can you describe kind of what you're looking for from the North that could resume those kind of joint operations, and what steps you needed, how close you are to maybe doing that?
So for 10 years, we operated between 1996 and 2005. Over time, conducting 33 joint activities with the North Koreans. Security is primarily our responsibility for our personnel. We also pay attention to communications, having communications abilities, as well as having an ability to medevac our personnel should they get hurt. What we would be looking for from the North Koreans is, again, a commitment from them that communications, medical evacuation requirements can be met, and more importantly, that we can conduct these joint operations in a collaborative way, as we had done for 10 years. It all comes down back in 2005 to their behavior on the international stage. The president, rightfully so, was concerned that their nuclear activities, their missile activities, were countermanding and counterproductive to our joint operations, which is why we suspended.
More the tone and the bigger geopolitical talks that are going on, or is it specifics about being in the field that you're really looking at right now?
Both. So Secretary Pompeo, in getting a reaffirmation from the North Koreans last month, affirmed that they do want to establish communications with us and to conduct joint operations. We have not started those negotiations. We will do so. It is on a separate track. However, as you well pointed out, it could be drawn into the greater geopolitical stream. But for now, We're treating it as a military-to-military contact, but more importantly, as a humanitarian endeavor that's separate and distinct from anything else. And by the way, the 45 countries that we work with all rightfully recognize this as a humanitarian endeavor, including countries like Russia and China, where we have tremendous cooperation with them.
John? Thank you, Sarah. Gentlemen, the recent death of former Congressman Bill Hendon of North Carolina brought back a lot of the rehashing of serious charges he made that those who were in Vietnam, either as prisoners or dead, were not fully accounted for. Has the book finally been closed on those Americans who served in Vietnam and were prisoners of war?
It has. So right now there are close to 1,600 that remain missing and unaccounted for. Within that set of unaccounted for is what we call last known alive. It's a small subset of individuals who, for whatever reason, were seen alive at a certain point during the war and remained unaccounted for. Our priority with the Vietnamese is to get at that subset, small subset. I think it's down to 25, not necessarily prisoners of war, but again, last known alive at the time that they were seen.
Take one last question, Brian.
Real quick, of the remains in the 55 boxes, can we confirm for a fact that all of them are human remains, or are we still questioning that?
Yes, we did a cursory inspection of the remains in Wonsan before we loaded them onto our military aircraft, just to ensure that at least some of what was in each box was human. When we got to Osan in South Korea, we spent 2 days going through every box in detail, conducting what we call a field forensic review. Purpose of that review is to ensure that every item is consistent with being human, and if there were any animal remains, we would have culled them out at that point. As it was, we did not find any animal remains.
Do we have any idea how many people that we're looking at yet?
No, we don't. You know, there is a scientific process to estimate that, and I wish it were very fast, because I think a lot of people would really like to know. The families would love to know that information, but unfortunately, it's going to take months of analysis to start to get a refined estimate.
Sorry, just one last question.
Sarah, thank you. Do you have a timeline for bringing back more remains? And can you characterize what it has been like to work with the North Koreans on this particular part of this process? Have they been working with you in good faith at every step of the way?
Okay, so the first question is, as Mr. McKeag mentioned, we're in the process of planning next steps, so we can't say we have any timeline today for bringing back more remains. We're hopeful that we will be in the not too distant future. I will say, though, in terms of having worked there, I worked there in the past during the 1996 to 2005 years. I spent a lot of time in the field there. And then I went into Wonsan with our team on July 27th, and there was a very different feel to it this time. It was a much more friendly, welcoming, and collegial approach this time compared to the way it used to be.
All right, guys, we're going to pull it from there into our newsroom. If you were on with us for the University of Maryland press conference, and if you missed a portion of that, you can take that scroller and kind of go back in the video stream and catch that press conference. Of course, pretty much the highlight of our stream today, the president speaking out about a new independent review, a commission to investigate the practices of the football program, and then also the athletic director speaking out about hiring an independent review team to investigate how they facilitate those medical practices with players on the team. So lots to come out of that. They did reveal that they dismissed one person, and that was strengthening and conditioning coach Rick Court. So that's what we know of the University of Maryland. Again, scroll back in our stream and catch most of that if you did miss it. But for now, guys, we're going to continue our coverage on digital on our other platforms, Twitter and Facebook, Fox 5 DC. Look us up, join us there. And then we'll be back for our evening broadcast, of course, as well. If you're local, pop it on to WTTG Channel 5. And we'll be back here on our YouTube channel tomorrow, midday, on our YouTube stream right here and on our website, fox5dc.com. So we'll see you there.